Councillors, probably the first thing I want to just bring your attention to is we've pivoted a little bit and some of the material we were going to cover we won't be covering, but obviously we have circulated information to elected members and asked for feedback. Those bits that we're not covering are bits that we have well canvassed with elected members over the last few weeks. And I'm going to hand over to Caro in a minute, but I just really want to emphasise that following this workshop, our efforts then go into finalising a council report, which will be a late item to the council agenda for the 13th, being next Wednesday. We hope to get that to elected members at either Friday, if not Friday, the latest Monday. And really, as officers, what we need to get today is enough direction so that we can, with confidence, finalise that council report, which is really a reflection of the last few months of work, but particularly when we come to the funding and the rating envelope conversation, it's really a reflection of the work over the last few weeks. So on that, I'm going to hand over to Caro, who's going to lead us, and then it's a bit of a tag team across around the table.
Great, thank you, Minnie, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, today there are several pieces in our workshop today, but we've called it an LTP update because basically we are building on the discussions and information that you've had and seen previously. So as we come into this, we are again working in our puzzle in the option development and identifying issues space. Not because we got stuck, but because we are building and refining on those ones. As Monique mentioned, the purpose of the presentation today shares different pieces to take us towards our goals about having material for consultation, document and supporting material. So today we are sharing key information for the financial strategy and infrastructure strategy. These are further conversations on issues that have been discussed previously, but we're now pulling them into the shape of the documents that you'll see them as they come back to you in the early new year. We'll discuss the revenue and financing policy, where council is non-compliant at the moment, and what we're doing to resolve these issues, focusing on trade waste and building and regulatory. Last night we shared the draft fees and charges table, and we'll update that and recirculate that to you following today's direction to include that. The final piece of the discussion this afternoon that Jacinta will lead you through is to discuss the budget package options to get to a 16% rates increase following the direction that we received last week. So the questions that we are asking, this is very much continuing to build these key pieces for the drafting of the budgets and the consultation material. So today we are asking, as Monique said, to confirm the direction for the financial strategy, infrastructure strategy, and revenue and financing policy splits, to provide guidance to us about what should and should not be included in the budget package for the rates increase, and to provide feedback so we as officers can move with confidence in finalising the report for you for the 13th. So it remains quite active, remaining in the do section for what we would like from you, please. Again, seeking your feedback, direction, ideas and guidance. And so on that, I will pass over to Jacinta to talk about some of the key assumptions.
Thank you. And some of these I won't need to focus on in detail, but are more here to provide an ongoing reflection and place that you can go back to at any point and understand where some of those key assumptions are. So one of those is in the interest space that I thought it was important that we touch on today. As we worked through those budget options and the budget packages, one of the conversations that we had was around interest rates and making sure that where we were facing some significant challenges around the level of interest rates, was it reasonable to hold interest rates at sort of a 4.5% level from a rates funding perspective. So in terms of that, following the OCR announcement last week, we have done some further work with our Treasury advisors to understand what interest rates were looking like for us with our current mix. And pleased to advise that things have dropped a little bit, sort of 30 basis points for us in terms of what that view looks like. So for 24-25, that view of 4.5 looks pretty good for us in terms of being able to meet that without too much of an issue. So that's a good space for us to be in. In the out years, that's drops a little bit, then it's sitting around the 4.5, 4.8. A question you may ask is around, why is it increasing when we think interest rates in the long term? We're getting indications that they're coming down for us. We had a really good period a number of years ago where we secured some fixed rate debt that was in the 1s and 2s. And so as some of that debt rolls off, we need to replace it with debt that's at that higher level. So that's why that growth looks like it's occurring in the outer years. As well, just highlighting, and I won't go into it, some of the key assumptions that we've got in our budgets around inflation and when we revalue our assets.
Jacinta?
Go ahead, Councillor Jennings.
Sorry to be a pain. I had seen these, the LGCI figures there, and they kind of struck me as a little bit low. So I was just wondering whether you could talk to where they're coming from. Is that coming from LGFA or who? It just seemed a little bit on the low side, so I was a bit surprised.
Thanks, and it's a very good question. So we constantly have a bit of that thought pattern in terms of, gosh, are these levels appropriate in terms of where they should sit? They do look on the low side when you first look at it as well. I think in terms of where they come from, Taituata, on behalf of New Zealand Local Government Commission Borough, to do that piece of work on an annual basis each year and go through and in each activity area set what they think those inflation levels are. They've done 2 lots of it in this last year, and they're not high. In the revaluation space, they're a bit higher in terms of 3 waters over the last 3 years. But you're right. I think it's something we do have to continue to monitor because they're not on the high side at this stage. But to be consistent with the rest of New Zealand and where they think the indices are heading, this is where they are. One thing that's probably important to mention is, as part of setting budgets, where managers have seen that we have provided these inflation indices out to the organisation, so that as they prepare their budgets, if there are particular contractual increases that they see that are above that level, then they have built in a bit more to compensate for that. Did you have another question? Oh, sorry, I didn't see the thumbs. So before we get into the conversation, and particularly the infrastructure side of things, what I thought I would highlight is we've had the conversation about where our debt limit is at 250% of our operating income. That's the dotted orange line that sits there now. Initial conversations in terms of where we had sort of a 45 to ideally a $50 million a year capital budget pushed us over that limit in terms particularly for the first 3 or 4 years. So as part of the workshops and part of the conversations that we've had over the last few workshops is that we're asked to have a look at, if we limited things, and as part of the budget packages that we'll be discussing in more detail at the end of the slides, is what would happen if we limited our capital program to $40 million in the first couple of years. That light blue line is what gives you that view of, if we are to do that from a borrowings perspective, that does help us in the sense that it gives us some flexibility or some room below our borrowings limit. That does have implications for us from an infrastructure perspective, but that's what Daniel's going to talk through today. This gives another view in terms of where you saw the light blue bar on the borrowings picture. On the capital side, this is what it translates to in terms of a capital program. So for this financial year, pegging it at 40 million and 40 million for the next year, then increasing to 45 and 51. Noting that the dark blue lines show ideally I shouldn't say ideally, from a pragmatic perspective, the infrastructure strategy have built in a much higher level in terms of capital in over the first 10 years. So as part of that infrastructure strategy debt conversation, Daniel will talk you through what that means in terms of priority for us and the risks we might face in that area to give you a sense of what that might mean for us. We talked about this in the last workshop, but it's just really to highlight is as we work through the capital program and look to limit that program, particularly in the first couple of years, that may mean in some of our areas that are not infrastructure specifically that we may need to limit some of that work so that we can do the core work that's needed in the infrastructure space and specifically to provide for growth that's coming on board. This is an ongoing slide that I will continue to include in all of our assumptions, just to give you a sense of where, from an operational perspective, we are debt funding any operational costs, and where in the outer years we are choosing to rates fund some of that loan repayment. And that's to make sure that it's really clear for you all, those decisions and those trade-offs between debt and rates, because that's ultimately the mix that we've got to balance over the first 10 years of the plan. As well, one key thing to highlight here as well is from an asset sales perspective is that we have limited that level to about 3.6 million in the first for the RTP. It hasn't been signposted to any specific assets at this stage, but was done so that there was some level in there, but without too high of an assumptions, so that we were conservative from a debt forecasting perspective. On the DC revenue side, also just to highlight, as our revenue is coming in, we're still at around the $1 million mark, but we're still getting the tail of those resource consents that were approved when we first put the DC policy back in 2021. So we do expect those levels to grow, and that does reflect and is in line with our growth assumption of around 2%. Pass over to Daniel for the infrastructure strategy.
Sorry, Cindy, can you go back 2 slides? The debt funding of recycling. One more. Yeah, there. 1.5, 1.3. So for the next one. Is that something, that's an assumption? Wow. So is that something we can debate on the 13th?
Thanks, great question. And so that one is what's currently sitting in there with a picture, but absolutely as part of package 2.5 that we'll talk to you about at the end, is as we worked through some of the conversation last week about potential options and what they might mean, absolutely in the mix to talk about today is whether we move to fully rates funding recycling, which would mean that rates would increase to do that by 1.3 million or 1.2, or we go some way in between that mix, or keep it as it is currently in the assumptions at 1.3 being debt funded. So absolutely, the intention is to have that conversation today as part of this, and it will be included in the endorsement paper for elected members to decide which option they would like to be included.
Yeah, afternoon. Just providing an update on the work we're doing around the infrastructure strategy. So providing a high-level overview today, noting that we have an infrastructure strategy which was created for the long-term plan 2021 through to 2051. So we're not sitting here today to say we need a full rewrite and we've achieved everything that was set out in our plan of 2021 or the work that was done in the long-term plan amendment 12 months ago. Starting from the overall infrastructure strategy, it really sets out our goals that we want to achieve over that 30-year period. It sets out the key issues, and then almost in a summary type form, it talks about how we will respond to those. And we're going through a process to review and update, and you'll see that in some of the subsequent slides. But what it's telling us is in a lot of areas there's very little change. That in a perfect world we would tick off every aspect of that infrastructure strategy in quick succession, and there'd be some level of comfort around our ability to do that. But what we are going to talk a little bit more on today is some of the things that may challenge us when we start to couple up what we would like to do in an infrastructure from an infrastructure strategy and planning sense, how we'll integrate that with our integrated growth planning work that we're going to shine a little bit more of a spotlight on as we draft or redraft the infrastructure strategy. There's some of these key projects and moves that will start to put some tension in that space, particularly around our investment in the wastewater and water supply network. So I'll talk a little bit more around that today. Happy to take any questions, but in some ways, if you're familiar with the infrastructure strategy of 2021-2051, the subsequent review that will come to the 24 Jan Council meeting won't look drastically different. If we run through the key challenges, be it growth at number 2, renewals number 3, resilience and climate change at number 4, level of service at 5, public health and environmental outcomes. Those are existing challenges that were set out in our previous infrastructure strategy. I've just added one at the top around the form of reform, which feels like has certainly emerged as a further challenge alongside funding and finance in that space over the last 3 years. So that's probably the key change in that space. We've got a question online. Councillor Jennings.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, sorry, just thinking about the infrastructure strategy and what's not inside it in terms of our capital program. Like, I'm thinking off the top of my head, the big ticket items that are in the capital program but aren't really dealt with and discussed in the infrastructure strategy are things like live-in town centre, property, that kind of stuff. But are there any other, and probably any internal treasury organisational type things? So from your perspective, is there anything inside the infrastructure that's not inside the infrastructure strategy that's a big ticket item in terms of the capital program that we just need to be aware of and have our minds tuned to? Because obviously in capping the capital program, particularly over the first 3 years, we're going to have to make some decisions around either turning the tap down on growth or delaying some renewals or other things, or not doing some new stuff. Like it's probably a combination of those 3 things. But I just want to have in my mind, is there anything inside that's not inside the infrastructure strategy that is a big part of our current proposed capital program?
Yeah, I perhaps lean on David a little bit to complement an answer to this, but there is a legislative requirement around what's in and out of an infrastructure strategy. So obviously our core 3 waters aspects, we made an intentional decision to include our property, our parks within the infrastructure strategy back in 2021. There would potentially be an opportunity where you could remove that, but it would be best practice to leave it in there. So it's not a specific requirement. Similarly, works in the likes of the town centre that we don't have a significant current asset that we're managing in that space, but it's not to say we couldn't look to the future, whether it was in this strategy or in the next. But so that's potentially an opportunity that we could pick up on. But in terms of what's missing, not so concerned about the 3 waters space, and we'll talk a little bit more on subsequent slides. But certainly the level of detail that's currently fleshed out around revocation and the impacts of O2NL, which could be very much linked into that strategic objective around O2NL. So whether that sits in the growth, which that currently sits under that section, if you read that in a little bit more detail, but certainly a focus moving forward that we've got more certainty on O2NL, and we should speak to potentially some of the implications and investment required in that space.
Can you remind me, is solid waste inside the infrastructure strategy? I'm just trying to pull it up.
No, that was removed on the basis of the landfill not being a critical sort of asset to manage and grow moving forward. So it was there was an intentional decision that was made in that at the time of drafting of the long-term plan 2021.
Okay, thank you. Thanks heaps.
Well, there's not really much to say about this other than we have some certainty, but we also have a great deal of uncertainty. I think elected members are abreast of that. Obviously, we provided a written update in lieu of the Three Waters Reform Task Force, but we know that the new government will repeal the current water legislation. We know that currently it's unlawful for us to include Three Waters post 31 October 2025, but we are doing that anyway because it's the sensible and pragmatic thing to do. But what is not clear is what form any future reform conversations will have. But what we do know is that there will be some form of conversation, because we know that sitting at the heart of any regional deal is expectation that there is a solution around infrastructure funding for growth and long-term delivery of Three Waters reform. So, I don't think this requires a whole lot of conversation. It's just an acknowledgement that this is a key feature of our infrastructure strategy. We just don't know.
Moving forward into growth, population growth and increased demand being a key challenge. Pretty well, this reads word for word according to our existing infrastructure strategy, with the exception that we've ticked off Foxton Pool. So over our 30-year infrastructure challenge and horizon, we've still got a significant amount of work to do, be it across stormwater, reticulation network, wastewater, parks and reserves. So all of those challenges are still current, along with the response that was set out in 2021. A lot of those responses are still relevant today and being worked on. What you will see emerging, though, through the time frame of the long-term plan between now and adoption in June is a level of certainty and decision around the likes of the Podes Road Reservoir or investment in our wastewater treatment plant. So 3 years ago, there was probably quite a small red flag around the wastewater treatment plant to say we should start looking to think about, with growth coming, what we should be doing. What you will see over the coming months is an emergence around critical investment required in short time. So I sat alongside a team of officers and external support this morning, looking at the wastewater master plan that's landed on our desk, and managed to cut a couple of those slides across into some of the slides today. But you expect to have a council decision around level of investment and investigative work and ultimately construction that will start to push the boundaries of that $40 million budget in year one of the long-term plan, and certainly start to shape up what the budget requirements look like into years 2 and 3. So certainly hot off the press, but I thought we'd share a little bit today around the Podes Road water supply. So this was identified back in 2021 as one of those critical aspects that if we are to grow, and certainly over that next 30 to 50 year horizon, that's important for the protection of our awa and for that sustainable growth to supply water, that we look at some long-term resilience. So there is an emerging decision of council around lodgement of a consent. We're still working quite closely with our iwi partners, and we have a site visit arranged on Monday that will start to work through that process. But within the time frame of this long-term plan, before it's adopted in June, there'll be a number of decisions required around this critical infrastructure investment. Similarly, around live-in water, 3 years ago, we didn't have a good sense of what was required in terms of our treatment plant. There was very little funding put aside in our 30-year plan to actually upgrade the treatment plant. So the subsequent work over the last 12 months has identified quite a significant investment if we were to take our plant from a effectively 15 megalitre plant up to a 30 megalitre to provide for the significant growth that's forecast. But there's a number of variables that sit within that, be it the water management. So there's a paper coming up to 13th of December council meeting that if we are to roll out the district-wide water metering, that would buy us effectively 5 years of capacity within that water treatment plant and system. But there is a whole lot of variables around the likes of our industrial suppliers existing and whether they're scaling up or down in their usage, and also the increased level of interest in industrial development that could start to test some of the capacity constraints in our water system. Similarly with the wastewater treatment plant, some of the assumptions.
Sorry, should we ask questions at the end of this or through? So there was 2 bullet points I wanted to ask about in the response space 2.2. That so we know that this LTP is about getting back or focusing on the basics, getting the basics right. So things like Donnelly Park, which we have sort of placeholder numbers and investment planned. Is this not the LTP to get a little bit into that, or just it's for later, we'll do another LTP before then? I guess what I'm signalling what I don't want to see is that in the next, if we don't look at that through this process, but in the next 3 years before that next LTP, some work happens in the background that councillors aren't necessarily aware of, and it shapes up to something that is not necessarily how we thought it should be prioritised. Sort of moving the sport or putting that code there and those ones are moving and these ones are like, if that stuff is happening in the next 3 years and we don't actually have that conversation first, I'm just saying, I know the money, design and planning money might get spent, but the actual construction of anything won't for a while. But still, I guess I'm flagging that I won't be too happy if stuff happens, even though we're told, let's just focus on basics, we'll get to that in 3 years, but stuff happens between times and we don't know about it.
One aspect in response to that is perhaps we need to focus not just on the challenges and the response, but the implementation plan and program. So when we start to think about a 30-year horizon, we could expect that Donnelly Park and Levin Domain will form part of that plan. And if the appetite is actually to say let's not do too much in the first 3 years, then we could almost move that along that implementation program. But similarly with the water investment, if we take Levin Water and Levin Wastewater, $150 million investment to cater for that growth, but if that happens over 15 years or 50 years, effectively what we're signing up for in the next 12 to 36 months is to start the planning work so that we've got a plan for the long term in the top drawer, so we can make it will help us with those decisions in the shorter term. And so part of the challenges we've had in an infrastructure planning space is that without that long-term plan, we struggle to make decisions around should we invest in band-aid solutions or are we jumping straight to the longer term. So similarly, if we had that program set out for council officers and we got that alignment with elected members around expectations, it might just help to align that we're not signing up to build a new water treatment plant or build Podes Road tomorrow. The next decision and hold point is effectively should we lodge a consent. So very much that work in an implementation plan, if that was to help to give comfort to elected members around where effort and investment is being put across that 3-year cycle.
So that strategic direction that we get from elected members for things like land transport and waters, we know that there is a significant amount of work to do to align that same direction setting in terms of the no-see-do in the parks and property space. It's important we keep money in the budget, so there's placeholders for investment. But absolutely, there's a big piece of work to do around what is our open spaces strategy for the district. What does that mean for sports, rec, parks, playgrounds, and message received, but also like message already well being implemented inside the business about a different way of working in that space.
The only other bullet point on that particular page is the second to last one in reference to the Kilmeister block. Like, obviously we haven't made any moves there, but if it's going to stay in the mix, no, okay.
Yeah, this, I suppose, in some ways was intentional to send that message today that a lot of these aspects haven't changed whilst we go through development. Yeah, quite rightly, 3 years ago it was referenced as the Kilmeister block. We no longer reference it as the Kilmeister block. It's a 34 hectare parcel of land held as part of the freeholding account at Foxton Beach. But as we move forward through this process, you can expect to see some slight tweaks, and we're
It's no assumption that we've made on sale proceeds from that 34 hectare block, because the assumption is that that would go back into the freeholding account potentially. So, but we haven't got.
We don't, but if it did, our debt would come down, but the holding account would go up from yeah.
Can I jump in?
certainly.
Yeah. So you're going to talk to this slide more or further through the presentation, because I was having a reaction to the last two bullets, and I just wondered when the right time to talk about those was.
Yeah, Councillor Jennings, merely the point that they're currently in that infrastructure strategy, and that you can expect to see a review across the majority of these line items, but there's not going to be significant change. But yeah, acknowledging that some things have changed in the last 3 years, and yeah, the version you see on the 24th will look somewhat different, and certainly our team will work to review that ahead of that time for that version. So this is, for the purpose of today, was a cut and paste of that infrastructure strategy, and to give an example, we've done some tweaks across that through water space, and you'll see some line throughs and some bolds, but it's by no means a completed review process.
Okay.
So, Councillor Jennings, is your, just so that I can make sure I've taken some appropriate notes, your concern around those last two bullet points are more that it does not align with the direction of travel, for example, like endowment land review. We've obviously built Foxton Pool. There's there won't necessarily be development planning around Foxton Pool, but maybe that language around the aquatics. I can't remember the language we use around the aquatics strategy and the returning back to council in time for direction on potential investment.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, like, because that second last bullet around the Kilmeister block, like the intention of putting it in previously was that we were going to make money available to go and consent that piece of land in order to return money to the community so that will reduce debt. And so obviously two things have changed since then. Is one, there's the freeholding account discussion, and also I understand that there's been some further understanding and assessment of the land and what it could actually yield in terms of numbers of property, stormwater, all that kind of stuff. And so my view is that I wouldn't want to waste too much more energy on that activity until it becomes clearer around, well, is it actually worthwhile doing for council, and is it worthwhile spending some energy on it if it's really constrained. And then on the last bullet around the aquatic centre, I think there'd been a signal that there needed to be some optioneering, that it wasn't just that the idea of upgrading the existing facility shouldn't be the only option on the table.
Yeah, we'll change the language so it's more about investment in aquatics facilities for the future.
in some ways, you touch on a good point there that although it's termed infrastructure strategy, a lot of what the content is really an infrastructure summary in terms of, and quite short term in their view. If we are to think over the 30-year horizon, just simply focusing on the Kilmeister block, is probably not as strategic as could be. So, when we go through this process, we are looking to start to look at how we speak to the integrated growth story, but also how we can elevate up some of the commentary within the document. Looking through around the wastewater treatment plant, like I say, there'll be a paper that we'll be preparing early in the new year to come to council with an update, and that'll be a fulsome update around the Live-in wastewater treatment plant. But it was something that was referenced in the original infrastructure strategy 2021. But the work that we've done over the last 12 months has painted a picture around the likely level of investment, and this is purely from an engineering type assessment. Obviously, a conversation with elected members around risk appetite for seismic events versus expectations around future growth will form part of that decision-making process. And the other point to highlight is that these engineering estimates are very high level. They're probably at the point of -50 to +100%. So they are significant. There's a significant shift in efficiency depending on how we package up some of this work and the investigations that will take place over the next 3 or 4 months. So you can certainly expect a paper early in the new year, but it's not good reading. And if you do want to highlight that today, that if we look at this one here, we've got a red box around everything that's got structural risk versus the orange box, which is capacity and performance constraints. You'll start to see that right the way through the treatment system, there's fairly well a constraint or a risk around every element, and some of those are being directly felt on a day-to-day basis from the treatment operators, particularly in our treatment of sludge, where we're at a point where we need to build a tank another tank to hold our sludge. We need to upgrade the treatment process, and having some certainty around the long-term solution means that we're not just putting a band-aid on, that we're actually building the right piece of the long-term puzzle in that upgrade. See a couple of buzz.
Daniel, earlier on you showed the graph where we've reduced capital spend by significant amounts. Now, if I add up what you've taken off over the next 7 years, it equates to about $170 million. Where does that come in? Because the figures after that don't seem to come back in.
Yeah, I'll get Daniel to touch on the when it comes back, but I just, for the public that are listening, I just want to be really clear. We've not taken it out. We have capped a capital program at 40 million to manage the rates increases that we are facing. Daniel will talk about how we shifted out, but the other, an option for us to consider is how we build a narrative around our growth, around the infrastructure needs of our district, in order to, through Crown Infrastructure Partners, but also through the regional city deal mechanism, look to leverage off our existing work of Taraika to try and leverage the government's balance sheet to help us out with some of that stuff. So that's us saying we can fund $40 million. Doesn't stop us from finding money from other mechanisms. Here's hoping that the regional deal mechanism might deliver something back for us by way of funding infrastructure for growth, because that's the government's intent, is they want us, it's all about productivity, and to get the productivity we need more homes and more businesses. Don't get that money. Sam, we'll just get Daniel to finish answering, and then Jonathan's first, and then you.
Yes, so those funds are in the long-term plan. So we have factored those in. What we've introduced over the last week is this cap that we're looking to put on both this year and next year. So you'll have seen what was circulated for Capital Project Steering Group that we took early direction from August to target a $45 to $47 million program. What the team will be doing over the coming weeks is to reforecast this financial year's to meet that $40 million target, and then looking at carryovers into next year alongside the emerging work across, in particular, our wastewater treatment plant upgrade, and starting to bundle that up into a package of work for the next 3 years. So we intend to bring that back to the February Capital Project Steering Group meeting. So we can't immediately respond today to say this is exactly what it looks like, but if you can think back to the couple of slides earlier where we showed a slice of the pie, that the Three Waters investment is currently 2/3 of our capital program. If we squeeze the size of the program, the message that we're trying to communicate here is that we can't just squeeze the investment in Three Waters, because all the information that's coming to light is that we actually need to be growing some of that investment. So somewhere there'll be a trade-off, and part of that might be in the next slide where I talk about our current deferred renewals program, and that we'll actually need to quite carefully manage how we invest or not in that renewal space to ensure that we get the right level of investment in our wastewater and water networks.
Well, I think my question might have already been answered, or maybe it's answered from the financial point of view, but the presentation we got last night about the significant assumptions has our population about 10,000 out from the population you used for your forecasting for the wastewater treatment plant. Is that an issue, or is that what you were saying that, hey, we're actually growing faster, where our projected growth is a lot faster than what we've already planned for, and so that's the shortfall you're going to go back to the government with and saying, we just can't meet our growth, projected growth?
Yeah, we do regularly face this issue that that the infrastructure is responding to growth, and in some ways, what we're signing up for with the water treatment plant, it's not in our water investment. This work is quite difficult over a longer term to forecast exactly when that investment's going to be required, because it's not based on a time frame. It's simply based on the demand of existing users. So if we can temper the existing, or the growth happens faster, then obviously the investment is required sooner. So there'll be continual processes over the life cycle of this wastewater upgrade where we'll need to revisit the growth assumptions on what's actually happened when the investment's required, along with the ultimate capacity when we start to size some of the headworks. But there is, that flexibility is part of what is being programmed into the new upgrades. That what we're expecting is to meet that long-term assumption on whether it's 10,000 more or less, 10,000 out, that the system would be a modular type system, so that we'd ultimately, to meet that required growth, require about 4 treatment trains, but we wouldn't be building a plant for 30 years' time in the next 5 years. We would be staging the development of just-in-time investment, knowing that ultimately the plant would have resilience to tack another treatment train on to allow us to grow over time. So the numbers will always change, whichever projection we work off. Generally,
Maybe just keep.
I was just thinking the difference is the forecasting assumptions are for the whole district. Your chart there just refers to the live-in population, so that's the difference.
Yeah, great. And will likely change over the course of the next 3 years as well as we start to get further projections and certainty. But the key message is there will be a decision point of council, and in some ways it's linked to planning for that growth, but it's also around a risk appetite where we do have a number of critical assets that have potentially seismic resilience issues, and it's just really working through the what if scenario. If we don't invest, what are the consequences of that? Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, Dan, actually, what you just said kind of ties into my question, because I know we're talking about investment to increase capacity for growth, but like this diagram is awesome and it's really, really clear. So thanks to the engineer, whoever put that together. But what I was wondering is, like, obviously here, so that resilience piece, like if you think about another project we've done, which is the upgraded influent pipe, and then you've got 2 clarifiers, 2 digesters. So there's some resilience there if one of the part of the system fails. And so I guess that's my question around single points of failure. Like, so have we got clear understanding and like sequencing in terms of our investment program where we're prioritizing or sequencing, those kind of riskier parts of the whole process, so that we're making investments in those earlier, or potentially we're able to make those decisions, like should we do those earlier as preferred, that's preferable to do that than perhaps increase the capacity if there's a trade-off in terms of whether we do something now or later. Because looking at that diagram, it gives you a good indication of, if one of the digesters goes down, well then it means you've got constrained performance, but you've still got one digester presumably in play, and it allows you to do the repairs or source the replacement. But are there other sort of single points of failure where we actually need to be really conscious about how we're investing and prioritizing those pieces of the puzzle?
Yeah, if you're excited by this one, Councillor Jennings, you'll be excited by the wider presentation, which goes into a whole lot more detail. Certainly answers a lot of your questions around resilience, but also points out a number of glaring opportunities to invest now, particularly around our sludge processes, where we are at risk of single point of failure and having to ship replacement parts out of Canada. That without this longer term plan, there was a hesitation to actually invest in the short term. But if we look at the consequence of failure of additional operational costs, if we can't operate that system for even a period of months, there's a really compelling case for investment. So we'll bring that back along with some other slides. Some of the other ones I haven't shared today actually show the longer term footprint that starts to embed across, and the new plant versus the piece of the system that will be upgraded over time. And there's a lot of thinking around that, similarly to the water treatment master plan that will come back early next year, that has a range of 5 different focus type areas that we could have an appetite for more water resilience, or we could focus on the hour or seismic strengthening, and they'll start to ask those questions around risk appetite of elected members in our community, that if we are to have an issue in one area, what's the consequence of that if we had to be tankering water versus all other means. So we'll come back with a session around that in the new year.
Thanks, Dan.
Just on the next subject of renewal, so almost hand in hand with growth, we've also got to do a whole lot of thinking around our existing network and how we manage that. And it's a common question that we're asked when we often bring up these growth projects, be it north of Levin or wastewater pipes down Kings Drive, just around the justification for actually our level of investment in renewals, and should we be pulling back, should we be ramping that up? So there is some early work to do. Early work comes through from external consultancies, which is almost a desktop assessment of our asset data. So it's effectively saying, based on the age of the pipe, known expected lifespan, what level of investment should we be putting into our renewals program? So we've got this by township, so it paints a really good picture to give us an understanding of the condition of pipes in Foxham versus the ones in Levin, and we're looking to try and match that with our LTP investment, which if we look at over a 10-year horizon, I've got a reasonable level of comfort that we've actually fulfilling our requirements to keep that asset in the current condition, or no worse off. But if we do look at a couple of these slides, it does paint a little bit of an alarming picture around the risk profile for wastewater and water within the Levin catchment, that totaling up to around about $75 million in year one of the long-term plan would be the sort of desktop theoretical investment to manage that level of risk. So if we start to unpack that, and you'll see a little bit more when we start to bring up subsequent papers around that risk appetite to continue to invest in renewals and the fact we can't just ignore it and focus on our treatment plant. So really just a snapshot today that there is a bow wave investment. We would expect that at least 30% of this would be shaved off as we started to do more testing. So in some ways, linking back to our response to renewals, it's around actually, before we just assume that a pipe's 70 years old and up for replacement, we're putting a camera down that pipe, we're doing those condition assessments. If we've got cast iron steel water mains, we're cutting pieces out of them, sending them away for testing, and saying, yes, it may be 100 years old, it used to be a gas pipe in Foxton, was converted to a water pipe, but actually it's as good as the day as it went in. So some of that thinking isn't embedded into that WSP work, and we'll look to actually refine that and link that up with our growth planning over the coming months. But yeah, just a really a headline issue that renewals is still a focus and should remain a priority of council as we move forward.
Justin, I know Daniel Justin has brought up a couple of times around when do we look at if we need to actually build a new plant somewhere else? Is that something you're going to look at or test, or at least 30 years out maybe look?
We have got through the process of the master plan. We've looked at the early drafts for our master plan expected that we could almost sweat a lot more of the asset and just plug in new pieces of renewal. But subsequent to all the seismic studies that have been done over the last couple of months and the latest work around that master plan, it is effectively building a new plant. So the premise that we simply can't move because it would be too costly to do so because there's efficiencies with the existing plant isn't such an argument. But we do have quite a lot of work that's been done around the risks of pumping raw sewage to a subsequent location. So I've put my councillor head on today to test the team to say, go away and do some further work to really come back with a compelling case when we present the master plan and that appetite for investment at the current location, that we've certainly done that due diligence around a relocation to an alternate site. So that's both looking at the cost, the operational cost that it wouldn't be uncommon to close down a smaller plant to pump it to a larger plant, the likes of Ashurst pumps to Palmerston North, but certainly pumping raw sewage comes with a number of both operational and environmental challenges, and that we really need to unpack that and demonstrate the reasons why. So that decision, there's no decision today, and even when we come back, we expect to be tested on that further if necessary. But the early indications are that the current site does have a number of advantages from a economic and an engineering standpoint, and probably best practice in terms of managing of raw sewage. But there's certainly some other considerations there that need to be talked about as a round table. So next up, resilience and climate change. So there will be a need to review and update, and obviously there's been some discussion, but this one is probably something that we'll be leaning on our strategic planning a little bit more to think forward around that climate change planning and implications of what's changed in the last 3 years. But you will see in the land transport space that we've had a number of shifts in terms of our focus away from just thinking about growth to actually looking at investment and resilience. And you'll see a similar theme that was brought forward in the long-term plan amendment around the need to actually invest in upgrades of our stormwater networks. Level of service, not significant change there, along with the public health and environmental outcomes, all still relevant. However, we are seeing a significant shift over that last 3 years from the likes of Tōmata Arawai, the focus on drinking water standards, and also the emerging level of service and the performance standards around wastewater disposal. So there's a lot of change in that space, and we can expect to see that over the course of the next 12 months. and the implications even around the freshwater and the the requirements around stormwater discharges. No further questions. I will hand back over to the team.
Thanks. So the purpose of this next part, and it will be a bit of a combo effort between Peishan and I, and then the members, various GMs and members of the managers around the room will jump in and talk to this as well. So in the last workshop, we provided you with the list of fees and charges, and also with a detailed list of the compliance and where it's sat across all the activities in terms of based on the budget that is currently in the system. So we left that with you. We didn't get into detail in terms of some of the options. What we intend to do today is to talk you through where in the detail that you received there was some levels of non-compliance. So from that we mean where, for example, we were not receiving the level of income relative to expenditure that we have in our current revenue financing policy. So that is where the public-private split might not be meeting at this stage. So what we intend to do today is to talk you through each of those. The managers have prepared all the analysis, and then to get to a position where they're recommending to you potentially some changes. Those changes will then be featured in the endorsement paper as well that will come to you either tomorrow or on Friday or on Monday. The other area that we'll talk you through as well is there are some areas where in the past we have assumed they will be 100% rates funded. And in some of those areas, we've actually, for example, in Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, we now receive some income in that activity. So it makes sense, if it's deemed to be consistent in some areas, that we would reflect that in the revenue financing policy. So we've got a couple of angles to tackle with you today. So regulatory, compliance, community facilities, and infrastructure. So the key areas that we'll talk you through in terms of current non-compliance and the proposal to change are in those areas. And firstly, I'll hand over to Blair, who'll talk through the regulatory side of things.
Same slide as the other day, from the other day, and a bit difficult to read on there. Maybe go to the next one, Jacinta, if you could. So this came out of the original presentation some time back, and like I indicated previously, what we did is we went from a zero cost base principle up to a sort of viable baseline based on a long run average of consenting. So how much work was required and then how many resources were required to do that work to get our sort of baseline cost. From that, we then worked out how we would recover that from a dollar perspective as an hourly rate. So where we started was the left-hand column there at like $173 an hour, so. Where we got to was more into the central column. We start to see the numbers jump up quite a bit. And then what we did really was then leverage the public-private split to try and get those market cost numbers at an hourly rate back down to what was deemed palatable in the sort of wider council space. The next slide shows you how that, well, not that one actually, that was working, but this slide here shows you comparatively with against adjacent councils and surrounding councils where we sit under the proposed scheme. So there was quite a bit of a shift there and back towards the norm and some parity around hourly rates in comparison with other councils. Why does it end up there? A little bit tricky to go through. We can talk through it, but for example, if we're forced to go out for resource consenting and use an external contractor, then the average rate
for an external contractor is circa $200. So $173 if we're forced to use external contractors because we don't have the internal resource, then we're losing at the margin, as I call it, every time we do that potentially in the current state. Even with the proposed changes, there's still not a massive gap there, and that gap we have to fit overhead costs and things like that within the structure as well. So it's a bit of a mix of internal and external costs to get to those numbers based around the baseline. But like I've said many times, it's really highly dependent on demand. So as demand changes, like if our demand doubled today from tomorrow, then we'd still have the same fixed cost base but twice the demand to try and service that demand. The thing that really gets hammered in that space is time then. So if we've got the same number of people trying to do twice as much, then time will suffer. So our time frames for delivering consents will go from, within 95% currently to maybe back to 50% where we were. So what suffers is time in that case. To try and recover that time and get back to performing in that in those ranges, then we use external contractors, which brings that higher cost back in and starts to mess up the mix. So a little bit complex, but hopefully that makes some sense.
So of the fixed cost as a percentage, would that be 30 or more like 40? Because from a principled position, when you think someone's applying for a building consent, it's an individual or a developer building something for themselves or to sell on to somebody, they need to pay for that. But in this equation, we're prepared to say, well, private person, you pay 70% of that cost, and the rest, the 30, falls on the ratepayer. And publicly, we pick up the rest of that tab. So that's why it's the way it is now. If it's not sufficiently covering the fixed costs, well, then I'm interested in moving it. But, when we're in a growth period and there's lots of development, yeah, they should pay. It shouldn't have to fall on the ratepayer. So I'm not prepared to shift it unless there's justification.
Yes. So we do have a fixed, like I said, overheads and the likes. We do have a fixed position that we need to cover, and obviously the consenting teams and the people in those teams aren't necessarily 100% effective. The thing you get with an external contractor is you arguably get a one-to-one 100% effectiveness calculation, but with our own people, we have other functions to perform around meetings or training or staying up to code and things. So there's a number of other activities that come in that go to that sort of non-costing type activity. So that's where we land at the moment. Probably the short answer in terms of is this where it should be in future? No. But that's our efficiency piece. So we really need to pull our efficiency lever to get better at what we do, and then that number will probably revert back further towards what you're indicating, Buddy.
So just so I'm following you. So within the activity, there's some BAU stuff that you'll do regardless of the amount of applications for consent you're processing. And when you're at capacity internally, you might sub it out to someone, and this is where these hourly rates kick in because you're paying externals to keep on top of the work. I get it, but if that's not sufficient, like if we're not covering those, and we just need to change the fee, the amount of it per hour that the 70% private person is paying.
Yep, absolutely, and that's an option. So on the prior couple of slides back, you'll see that the rate in that space, if you took out any funding from, if you went back to our previous split, which I think was like 80-20, thereabouts, then you would have the building rate would be more like $280 an hour. And there's a bit of variation in there too, because what we've done is somebody who's processing or consenting a commercial building like a supermarket, there's a whole bunch more complexity and time and difficulty involved in that, and the skill set's higher, so we pay more for those people literally. For something like a garage, and the skill set's lower, and we have a slightly scale of cost in there as well. So we could go. There are options there, so we could back off those public-private splits. Really, what we were using that for was just that was a sequence to try and get it into a like peer type market rate from a labour perspective. We could increase it and change the split.
So if I go to your table where you have the greens and the reds, I guess in the 21-22 year, that was just out of proportion, and which is why we kind of tried to reset and get that right, which it improved. And then according to the budgeted 23-24 year on those splits, it's about right in the building consent space, and even in the one above for resource consents. The next one though, where you've flagged 24-25 budget, that's now looking like it's not where it should be. But the only other, when we compare ourselves with the neighbours, I mean, last economic, well, I guess the trends of our tracking in terms of growth, because each community is different. Horowhenua in the Horizons region was either the highest or even second. We're at the top. Our growth rate, the percentage, was above the others, and I think this. Do you think we should just leave it? I'd like to leave it like that.
I mean, leaving it's an option, and I don't know. I'll have to draw.
I just want to make sure I understand what Councillor Tukapaua, because when you say leave it, you mean stick to the proposed 30-70, 60-40, which is a shift. So I'm looking at the same one.
No, go back. That one.
Where we've got you've got the public and private splits there, and it's a range more than it's not 60 or it's not 70, it's 60 to 70, and the 30 to 40 and the 10 to 20 and the 80 to 90. Even though I know it's not being achieved because that's what the red is indicating, but what does it take to get there? So what I'm saying is I'd like to stick with the original.
Jacinta, if you go ahead 2 slides, back one, to get to those splits, we would have to, our fees would be in that middle column.
And what? 20.
Yeah, and 414 per hour instead of 220 per hour. Correct.
Part of the thing that makes it difficult to read, and like I said, it's probably easier to draw. I like drawing, but where we're at now, Pity, and what's red is we're below the baseline. So consents have dropped off like 25+% in both resource and building consents. So we're like below the long run average for the district. That's even excluding growth. So like if you look at the long run average for consents, we're below that line. So what I've tried to budget on is a long run average with some of the growth around our 95th percentile. So we're actually below that line, which is making us run in the red at the moment. So what this is trying to do is get us back to line ball. So as growth comes back, like as consents come back, it'll revert. And so it's changing the model from a sort of fixed with demand going like this impacting our output to trying to get us into a position where we can follow that stuff.
And so, Patty, I just because what I'm sensing from you is that you want assurances that we're not just moving the splits so that we can be compliant. You want to make sure that it's not about becoming compliant, it's about making sure that the private sector, the development community are paying their fair share. And so, Blair, if you could just comment on that, like if we go to the proposed splits, which is the 29.71 and 62.38, like if we step back from the numbers, don't worry about what the hourly rates are, but just from a really principled perspective, is our ratepayer subsidising the private developer, or does that fairly reflect the public good component when you think about all the work our team does that we can't bill?
You can answer that, but I guess I take your point about the long run average, and I can accept that as a justification for doing something different later.
No, I want to hear the answer.
Because when we were the other way around a couple of years ago, when demand was high, it was completely the opposite to what it is now. Yeah.
Can I jump in here? Because, look, I agree with Pretty that this has to be, we have to take a principled approach to make it user pays. But the thing that I'm trying to reconcile is that we are legally mandated to provide the resource consenting and building consenting function. So even if not a single person applied for a building consent or a resource consent in a particular year, unlikely as it is, we would still incur costs simply to have that function available in the event that an application came in. And so there has to be a base amount that is funded at large by the ratepayer simply to have the function available for when it is required. But then the time that is allocated and benefits a private individual, absolutely there should be a weighting towards that person paying as much as possible can be attributed and specifically allocated to them. So I don't know how that works in terms of getting to a principled split here, but I do think we have to take into account that, like, the reason that these are 100% private is that there is always that component, particularly for these statutory mandated functions, that we have to have them whether they're used or not because they're so demand driven. So I don't know if it's probably very hard to calculate the minimum base cost of these functions and then everything over and above it. But I guess that's what forms part of the public component in terms of that percentage. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's correct, Sam. That's exactly what we're talking about. And yeah, we could go to one building officer, but going below the long run sort of baseline for building consents, knowing that we're in a pretty tough economic time and it's going to turn around probably next year sometime. Most people are predicting then to peer back to one building officer and then try and chase 1,000 consents, next year would be crazy because, as you know, probably from when we're at peak, timeframes were well out. There's probably people sitting around here trying to get hold of building officers and planners, which we couldn't get because they're just not in the market, and then we suffer on the other side in terms of really constraining our ability to grow as a district. Because if we can't deliver on these numbers from a turnaround perspective, like I said to some others, that turns into cash flow for the community. So if we go out to a month in terms of delivery around inspections or consents or something, then that's constraining our cash flow through the community by a month. So that that could be millions of dollars. So we very much see our job in trying to optimise that space and get those numbers back. but also being fit for purpose, moving to an activity-based costing space. So it is very much a user-pays thing, driven around a very efficient team, which we're yet to get there, but we're on the journey. So, and maintaining the resource to service, like Sam's pointed out, exactly so.
I kind of do have another question. And Sam kind of answered the last question, and you did as well. Thanks, Blair. I mean, isn't there a point where if you have so many consents that can cover that base salary of all those staff that you have, then why don't you just go 100% private after that to recover any extra over above that number of consents you need?
100% outsource, you mean? Like, yeah, well, you could, and I guess 100% public or 100% private. Sorry, 100% private. Yeah, there will be a time I think we would get to that. But part of that's about our efficiency. The other option is we go out to market and use consultants to keep timeframes in check. That's the other option, or we can outsource a lot, but then we'd still need that rate to cover the consultants.
But Blair, could one of the and I suppose this is down to the elected members around the table as well, but I'm wondering, like, because you've obviously been talking about the systems that you're putting in place in order to better track time and understand where time's being spent, what the cost to serve is in terms of particular applications and particular jobs within the range of jobs that are being done and range of applications and consents and building consents that are being considered. I'm wondering if our recommendation could be to council that there is some further, more comprehensive review of this part of the revenue and finance policy in 12 months or 2 years, because I totally get Pitty's point, but it also seems like that we have a level of confidence, but not a high level of confidence around exactly where these splits should sit, because a whole lot of it is demand driven, but also we're kind of making some assumptions around where the time is being spent and how much of it's benefiting just the public at large who want to ring up with an inquiry versus a building consenting process where it's far easier to say, well, we've got 500 building consents, there's X cost, and one model would be just to take that X cost divided by 500, but that doesn't take into account the peaks and troughs. So like it feels like we need a little bit more data, a little bit more information, and I think that the only thing that we can do is give that some time to get that data, to have that more detailed sort of review of what's reasonable in this space.
I think that's a good way forward, Sam. Like, I think our recommendation is that the proposed splits, like they're obviously, it's a significant increase in the fees, but it is still a fair reflection of the work that is required at a base level, but also, where we are able to bill hours versus where we're not able to bill hours. And I suppose the thing that I want to emphasise is I see on a daily basis the amount of time that can get consumed in a customer query, pre-lodgement or post-lodgement, where it's not fair and reasonable to put that cost on to the developer because it's a query that's coming from another member of the public, and that could be the decision to even notify or not notify. So there is time consumed in us delivering this service for our community. But yeah, I think the monitoring of how we're tracking, but also the recognition that it's really difficult to view it just in a 1 year time frame, because of even like some income comes in 1 year, but actually the hours are needing to be spent the next year. But there'll be pushback about this increase, but it's a reflection of the cost to serve.
Yeah, personally, I mean, absolutely. I don't think it's a fix. I don't think it's a set and forget. I think it's we're on a journey, and there's going to be, improvement and demand in the market will change. So I certainly envisage that will improve from here. But to cover where we're at currently and in the current market state, then that's where we are targeting to be.
Just reminding the table as well that in the last long-term plan where we had levels of consents where there was more revenue than had been anticipated and it was effectively going the other way, that the council made a decision to use any surplus to offset the rates for that activity in the future year. So that was where there was an excess of through the growth period that was used to reduce rates for that regulatory area going forward. So just to flag that as well.
And in that period, just to my point earlier, is I think in that period, I don't have the graph in front of me, but timeframes were extensive as well in terms of delivering on those consents. So there was a whole bunch of revenue, but there was also very ugly timeframes for the delivery to the market. So it's trying to balance that and get that stuff right.
I think you'll see when your performance report comes out, we're balancing that now in terms of this year and the fact that this year we're not seeing the revenue we'd anticipated. So things are looking to flip in the other direction. So it is that longer term view of how does that look over sort of a 4 to 5 year period or longer, ideally. Okay, I'll invite Vi to come forward and talk through the dog control side of things.
Kia ora everyone. So out of the compliance activities, it's just the dog control activity that you saw last week that is currently under recovering in terms of the private benefit, public-private split. What you'll see here is I've done some comparison with the other councils in our region and outside our region as well to look at where we sit in terms of the public-private splits, what they look like in other councils. Also there on the left-hand side, you'll see there's the number of dogs because, of course, it's dependent on, they will need to set their fees dependent on the number of dog owners to be able to spread their costs across. And then on the right-hand side there, the range of fees. On the top then, you'll see the Horowhenua District Council ones, so the ones that that you'll see in the next slide here. There are a couple of options up there, what the fees range would look like at a 30% increase and what the fees would look like at a 15% increase. On this slide, what you see is what a 30% increase looks like, what a 15% increase looks like, and what a 10% increase looks like in terms of the fee, what the fee would look like. And you'll see between the current fees of the 2023-2024 fees and a 30% increase for majority of dogs that we have in our database, most of them are desexed urban pets. It would move from $96 to $124. And then you'll see those in the columns there. Our current policy sets the public component at 10 to 20% and our private component at 80 to 90% recovered from the dog owner. Bearing in mind that this is the dog owner who is a good dog owner, actually pays their dog registration fees and we receive that as income. In those previous slides, you would have seen the option there around a 30% increase or a 15% increase. If we go with the 30% increase, that amount is expected to achieve, so long as people pay, and they can afford to pay, is expected to achieve the current revenue and financing policy set at 80% recovery. If we wanted to move it to a 15% increase to achieve a 70% increase, it would mean a 70% recovery from dog owners, it would mean a change to the revenue and financing policy. And that change would be by 10% to recover 10 to 30% from the public and 70 to 90% from private. And that actually would put it back to what it was before we made that change in the LTPA.
Oh, sorry, can you just remind me what our fee was a year or so ago?
Yeah, sure. So well, I can show you last year, or this current year's fees looks like that. The year before that, it was 18% that we increased it from the previous year up to 80. So last year, during the LTPA, when we set the fees for the 2023-2024, it increased by 18%. And then for 2024-2025, if we want to meet the current revenue and financing policy that was amended during the LTPA, then we would need to increase it by a further 30%.
So most of our pets are D6.
Correct.
Right. So that fee is currently $26.
Correct.
And that was 80.
That's correct. So, just in closing, while you're considering that, I think there's a couple of things to point out. I mentioned during the corridor that. I mentioned during the corridor that it is dependent on the fees being paid. So it is good dog owners that typically pay their registration fees and they pay them on time. And I think what we should be doing is considering who is actually the user. So in these slides, you'll see I've put the user pays in the context that it is the dog owner. But actually, dog control doesn't just provide a service to the dog owner. They also provide they provide a service to the entire community. And so what we're considering is how much of the service that we must provide should be covered by the ratepayer, and is it fair at the moment at the 10 to 20? Should we change it to 10 to 30, or what that answer might be?
Hey, Vi. Sam here. Look, I was one of the councillors last year that pushed for us to go to more user pays, probably more extreme user pays, private split for dogs. But I guess it's, on reflection, I could have been wrong, because if you think about what we've just discussed with building and resource consenting, again, this is one of these activities where we have a statutory obligation to provide a level of dog control service. And so even if there was not a single dog registered in the district, we would have to have an element of cost to provide that function. But I don't know if that's actually practical or feasible in this situation where that's theory, but in practice we know that there's X number of dog owners, and yes, they're the ones that essentially require us or generate the need to have the infrastructure and the systems and the people in order to have a well-functioning dog control function. But so my question, getting to the point, is that if you could narrow down like the bare minimum cost of a dog control function, is that still likely to be like pretty similar to what we're funding anyway through dog registrations? Like, there's actually not much over and above like a base level that we actually incur, because it's not really demand driven. We just have to have a base system and base infrastructure in order to deal with the registrations and the dogs coming into the district. Does that make sense?
I think so. If I'm understanding you correctly, Councillor Jennings, it's around if we had to provide this service, are we providing what would be the minimum service anyway? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, pretty much.
So, yes, that's the case. The majority of the cost involved with the running of dog control is actually having dog control.
The more dogs we have, it doesn't necessarily mean that the cost of providing the service increases at a steady rate, right? Like there's a base cost simply to have a dog control function that, say, it's $1 million a year, and so that cost happens whether there's one dog registered or 5,000. Am I kind of on the right track or not? Is there like a base level, and then you can actually track that for every additional dog registered, there's an additional cost to provide that service?
There will be an additional cost based on the number of dogs, just inherent with the number of incidents that might happen with that increase in the number of dogs. So it's based on the number of incidents that we respond to in terms of where the cost comes from. So we've got, let's say 5 dogs, and each of those 5 dogs do nothing. Then that cost is going to be relatively low. But if we have 6 dogs and that one dog is a problem dog, then that's going to drive up the increase. That's going to drive up the cost. But if that one dog is not, then it's not going to have much of a difference in terms of the service delivery. Does it make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Similar to, maybe you don't have the numbers right now, but what is the base cost? Like, what does it cost to have that service without all the extra call-outs and bits and pieces? But I guess what I was one of the ones that was a 20/80 on the public-private split for this. I like dogs. I got one. And if there were no dogs, we would not need dog control. And what it pays for is people to answer to call-outs. We actually have to have staff whether they're responding to dogs or not. That those people still exist. We still have a dog pound. We still have vehicles that go out and about, cameras, equipment, all of that stuff. And yes, there are responsible ones that will pay their we didn't. If and you think, well, if they've got their dog inside their property, that's their property, should be fine. But from time to time, dogs get out, yeah. And from time to time, like your example might have 5 dogs and only one's problematic, If something does happen, you don't want things to happen, but they do. That there is to cover, community, but everybody actually. And there was quite a debate on was it 90/10 or was it 20/80? I was comfortable where it's at, and yes, because we weren't even near that policy setting, we've had to incrementally, and 18% I heard last time, and we're going up again to meet it. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, there's sound reason around why, and which I don't know where the majority will be at this time, but yeah, I'm comfortable where it's at.
At some stage though, it would be good to understand, after having the increase this year, how many more dogs are not licensed as against the previous year after the increase, so that we can get some handle on by increasing fees. Does that also correlate to those that decide not to license their dogs? It would be interesting to understand that.
Interestingly, there was actually less dogs unregistered this year than there was last year. So it moved from 270 unregistered dogs the previous year to 191 unregistered dogs this year.
Any particular reason?
Was actually resourcing. So we were going through a recruitment period last year. We managed to recruit into that role, which meant we had the resources to go out and to actively encourage dog owners to register their dog, albeit at the penalty fee.
I was just going to say, do you also think we've changed a little bit of how easy we make it for people to be able to do it in terms of some of the methodology, and also where we opened up the ability to do it earlier as well, Motiville?
Thanks, David. Yes, I do. I think that has helped. Also, bringing online payments. So we've recently, in the last few years, gone out with electronic dog registrations. There's now a new dog registration form that you can fill in online now too. So we are trying to be more available.
So on that, just I guess a question around. So if someone was enter an arrangement around paying their dog fees, are we applying the 50%, or are we waiving that and setting it so that like rates they can pay it across a year rather than all at one time?
If they are going, so those that set up a payment arrangement and are going to make the payment by the due date, then in fairness to everyone else, we will to them and everyone else, we allow them to pay at that fee. If they're going to extend their payment arrangement past the penalty due date, then we add the penalty on top, and then they can pay that incrementally.
I'm relatively comfortable with where you're looking to propose to in terms of the 30% up to 104. It's a principled discussion around where we want to actually shift some of this cost, and we litigated that at LTP last time, so I'm not really inclined to step back from there. It's one of these numbers that if you talk about a 48% increase over 2 years, it sounds horrendous. But then when you break it down to the cost went from $76 to $104, or whatever the actual figures went down, that in real terms it's not as much, you think. To Piddy's point, it moves us, it corrects the position, and then you can reasonably expect that the next few years adjustments are purely going to be on the basis of cost versus correcting our policy position or where we're sitting.
Thanks. Next, Mark's going to come forward and discuss the community facilities.
Can I just confirm that there was, because listening to Pity and Clint and the numbers around the registrations, you all persuaded me that sticking with the current split is the right way to go, and the 30% increase is appropriate. So is there kind of consensus around the table around that?
I don't know whether I'm in that space, to be honest, Sam.
Because are we giving? I mean, I know that lots and lots of people are away today, but are we giving direction today to take that forward?
Well, we need sufficient direction to finalise the report for the 13th of December.
Yeah, well, and I think you have to go based on the numbers available today. So, given that there's small numbers, is that the way we're doing this?
I mean, Sam, I'd just point out to it's a similar discussion we had around the table at the LPTA last year when there was a full council. So, unless there's a very clear direction that we want to readjust our policy settings, I don't see why we would adjust it. We've set our direction of travel, and I haven't heard anything contrary to suggest we would want to relitigate or re-review it.
Good call, Clint.
So the option we'll present in the paper, well, it's not the option we'll present in the paper. What we will present in the paper, noting that elected members could pitch something different by utilising standing orders, is the 80% private funding target, which would see a 30% increase in dog fees.
Good to continue. Kia ora, everybody. Here to talk to you about community facilities and services and our revenue and finance policy. There's a bit of red there. And so I've got a couple, in the next slide I've got a couple of suggestions, but you'll see that in our library and community centre space, obviously we're struggling to meet our compliance, and in swimming pools the same, but just, and I'll talk to that in just a minute. So I suppose from the table today, wanted to highlight with you, so in the last workshop you gave me a clear mandate to go away and increase our meeting room booking facilities. We're crunching some numbers behind the scenes at the moment. I heard that you're keen to take that up even to 20%, so we're playing with those numbers now. In our community facility space at the moment, In order for us to meet compliance, we're about 500k short. So quite a bit there. We will do our best, and so the reason I highlight meeting rooms and functions is because that's one option around how do we increase some revenue. I know there'll be a discussion later on about other changes and savings that will then also help contribute to that, but it's still high in terms of that difference. With that in mind, I suppose we're putting the recommendation forward today and get a steer from the table to look at a 10 to 15% private split, which for us at the moment, if you look at our budget, I think we're sitting at 8% 8.17. So again, that's a stretch target for me, and I acknowledge that, but I think that there are still some streams that I can look into to help us get to that 10%. So I'm putting that on the table today to kind of get a bit of a steer if we're comfortable with that. Do we want to start with that before I move into aquatics? Any comments on that one?
Hey, Mark.
Go on, Sam.
Mark, just a quick question. So the revenue we get from other sources like AA and visitor information stuff, does that get factored into the income assumptions in terms of this?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thanks.
Most of those increases that you had for those meeting rooms were reasonably small in dollar terms, weren't they? I can't see any reason why you wouldn't. And there were a couple that I saw no increase, in fact, on, and I think you could very well, put up further. Look, there was minor things that things like photocopying, and that you could certainly increase if you wanted to. It was probably... for me, that would be better than increasing some of the rentals, to be honest. I would rather see, the trade-off, if you like, in terms of doing that.
And I think Mark's kind of got a clear direction to lift those fees where it makes sense and where it doesn't. Probably the message you're hearing from Mark is we're $500,000 in the hole. That's not going to get it. Like, those fees are not going to get it. And probably the other thing that I'd just ask councillors to be mindful of is with the changes that we're proposing in package 2.5, but in addition to that, some of the operational savings that are being offered up in package 2.5, all of that will ultimately put further pressure on our revenue because it means that we've got less energy or time to put into some of that stuff. I think is there a value, Mark, that you're proposing that you would target? Did I make the $75,000 up? Yeah, I made that up.
I think, and I've got Pashon next to me, she might recall the figure. I think if we go down to the 10 to 15%, I think it's about 150 takes us to the difference. Yeah, 120. Yeah. So again, a bit more healthier than 500. And like I said, it's a stretch target, but I suppose I'm telling the table today that I'll go away and try my best to get that.
Just remembering as well in relation to the previous decisions made as well as around, I know it's not a big number, but library funds as well. So they used to be part of the mix as well in terms of that revenue space. So things are changing in that as well.
So kind of what I'm hearing here is we've got to take a little bit of a small step towards where we want to be. But given the other pressures that space or your space will potentially be facing over the next year, that small step is still a stretch, and it's probably appropriate that we accept what you're looking to
do. This is a random, if destination management and community facilities was to partner and do one or two events that you ticketed and charged in the aim to profit. So is that worthwhile? I mean, I'm not talking next year, but long term view, is that kind of thing worthwhile looking at, or not? Don't even bother.
I think there's two parts to that. One, there's something we can look at, and it's something the team's always thinking about. I don't think it's going to be a huge amount if I think about the events. I think the other part for us is we're community facilities, and so when we hold those events, it's got a community aspect to it. So therefore, we have to weigh up that equity piece around making sure it's affordable. And I think that's some of the challenge we sometimes face.
Oh, I'm more thinking of like directly across from Te Tākiri, the Levin domain, and some extravagant. Like, 660, because Bernie, he went to the hut and got on stage with the other mayor and had a great time, and says we should do that in Levin. I'm like, yeah, right behind you.
Yes, agreed. We're always looking at how we can do things better. You'll remember that in one of the workshops, and we've agreed to it, is we're slowly increasing our events budget. And then obviously there's conversation around the contestable events budget as well. So we would look to partner at those situations and how do we maximise that. So you're right, Councillor Tukapua, it's not a next year thing, but it's on our journey. Right, so if I move, aquatics is straightforward, I think. Essentially, what we are looking at doing there is, I talked in the last workshop about a 50-cent increase per lesson. That is about a $10,000 per annum increase. So it works out to be roughly $5 a term. In addition to that, with our alignment of Foxton Pool entry prices with Levin and the spa fee, we've done some rough figures there to bring us up just shy of 11k in addition to the forecasted revenue for that space. Now, if we do that, because in our table, we're falling short there by $10,000. $10,000 gets us into the compliance. So already there with those, what we're going to see in aquatics, we will fall. So I suppose I'm just flagging with you that we will be able to meet compliance in that space.
Like, we got pretty clear direction about no for the hydroslide. This is suggesting a fee for the spa in Foxton, but we wouldn't be having a fee for the hydrotherapy pool in Levin. So I just want to, you guys okay with the inconsistency there? Or would you prefer that we just increase swim school fees and align Foxton prices with Levin?
Yep. I would like to see some rounding though. It seems ridiculous that we charge 10 cents.
So,
yeah, sorry, Sam. We are doing a rounding piece. Sorry, Sam.
No, I was going to say. I take a different view to Bernie. I think that we should be. It's.
Sorry, Sam, we can't hear you. You're cutting out.
I was basically saying I prefer to have increase in recreational components of our aquatics fees than use the swim school fees to find the savings. Like, yeah, so I'm definitely for aligning the Foxton Pool entry prices, spa fee, any other sort of recreational increases. But yeah, so it's kind of comfortable with what's proposed. But I'd rather see recreational prices increase than educational stuff.
So, Councillor Jones, can I just confirm? So you're talking about general entry prices having a general increase, is that right?
Oh, look, all I was responding to was what the comment from Bernie that he'd prefer to have the swim school fees than the other spa fees and stuff. But I'm saying I'm the opposite. Yeah.
I didn't actually say that, Sam, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. I was talking about the library fee.
Oh, apologies.
No worries.
So yeah, we'll take your point, Councillor Jennings. We can look at it. I don't know if there's any other discussion around the table that wants to be had around that.
Should the ratepayer, do you guys feel okay about the ratepayer subsidising our swim school, even if not all children can access it? Like, so do you still hold that view that we should not increase swim school fees if it doesn't wash its face?
No, I think the proposed settings around the learn to swim is okay. So I don't agree with Sam. But the whole hydrotherapy pool versus the spa, the answer is a yes to your question. Okay.
Why in Foxton and not Levin though?
A spa sounds like it's more of a leisurely thing versus a hydrotherapy pool, which is for therapeutic. I could be wrong. Is it the same, just a different name?
No. Spa is there's different criteria to be a spa pool. It's higher temperature and different treatment, so it is different to a hydrotherapy pool. It's not the same thing.
I just support what you proposed, Mark. It looks good.
Very good. I think I'm all good. Thank you very much, everyone.
Solid waste, wastewater, water supply. Starting with solid waste, we've got a history, as you can see on screen, of operating in the red. We have had some direction from previous briefings around investigating the potential for change, but we need to measure that against the fact that we've got significant contracted and increasing fixed costs that actually do limit our levers in the solid waste activity. So certainly through the work we've done to date, there's been a commitment to separate out landfill from the waste transfer stations and the way that's funded, and the loan and aftercare costs of the landfill, creating that separation. There's clearly been a reduction in revenue from the landfill. We've had significant increases in revenue and charges at the Foxton transfer station as part of the long-term plan amendment. So we have in some ways tried to correct some of that public-private split. But the fact that we do have existing contracts that don't generate a lot of revenue back to council very much forms part of that back to basics that we need to do that full review, set our sights on what the goalpost of delivery within the solid waste activity is. If we're not rolling out further services, and it's just a matter of delivering well what we currently do, that will set the basis for some of those contracts reviews, particularly around transfer stations. But secondly, as we move across into the refuse collection, that to use the term, it doesn't currently wash its face. We know that there's options, and the directive that we've had from elected members is to bring a business case to the table around an increase in bags or a decrease, and there's some implications around that, both contractually and also towards our wider initiatives around waste minimisation, that if we're just simply leaving it to the market to gather as much as much waste as possible and generate revenue from that, then in some ways we're going against our goals in waste minimisation. So previous direction we've had is that we need a business case brought to council, so we're not seeking direction on that today, but what we are identifying is that there's a clear mismatch in a track record of not meeting that public-private split in the space, and there's no immediate lever that we can pull to correct that.
Just to flag, so going forward in the paper, in the endorsement paper that'll go forward, you would expect to see effectively three things in this space. So what we've heard is there's the landfill and the cost of landfill remediation and the repayment of the loan. So you'd expect to see, based on what we've heard from you, is that should be rates funded. So that you expect to see that 100% rates funded in the recycling space. You've asked us to bring some modelling around only the cost of recycling should be paid for by those that receive a recycling service. So in that case, that would again be 100% funded through rates, but a targeted rate. And then in terms of what Dan's saying as well, the rest in terms of rubbish collection and the transfer station is then defining that mix. So instead of having the two there would be three going forward. That is in line with the thinking around the table in terms of what you expect?
Can I just double check something? So that slide there, refuse collection, public-private split is 0 to 15, 85 to 100, but it's red, and so if we look 23, 24 and then 24, 25, pretty much the private person is paying either 32% or 45% of the true cost, so the rest is falling on the ratepayer. And what that means is, if you move to the next slide, refuse collection, it's the bags. So if you're disposing of your waste via a council bag, paying $4, the actual true cost of that is actually about 10. If I'm just using round figures based on the table I just recalled. So $10 for us to collect that bag, but users are paying for, and ratepayers are picking up the rest. But ratepayers that don't choose to use the bag are having a wheelie bin collection by some company of their choice. So they're paying twice. They're subsidising the bag person, paying their own and some through a solid waste rate. And the other way to look at the $4 bag is, if you're using that, we assume that you're minimising your waste. And that's the justification to keep it the way it is, or recommend lower bag prices to increase the market. So maybe go to $3 and then the ratepayer picks up a bit more. I'm not sure about that. I just had to break it down and see if I am understanding that correctly.
Yeah, I suppose the direction from the wider council audience when we had this conversation previously was there was a split in views. There was a need to see more facts around the current contract model, future contract models, and the team have done some quite good work in the background to inform that and bring a paper to council ultimately to make a decision. But if we were just to review the comments around a $4 bag costing $10 to pick up, that's not quite the case. That it's certainly a lot closer. It's we're talking dollars in terms of that variance. But if we were to increase the cost of bags by $1 or $2, you could make an assumption that the closer we get to the cost of a wheelie bin, the likelihood is that you're going to see a downwards trend in uptake of bags, but that's not correlated with the cost to pick up the bag. So unless you entirely remove that bag service, it's likely that the cost to the community would actually increase further, because there's still a cost for the truck to drive around every street, whether he picks up one bag in the street or 10. To a certain point, there's not an increased cost for that service. So there's a number of complexities around the current contract model and the way that those services are procured, and also the way it's disposed of, that we see a very real opportunity around actually increasing our share of the bag market over the longer term, so that but that needs to be brought to council for a decision based on numbers and facts, and that was the message that we've heard from council. But it's not just as simple as we up the price of bags and we generate more revenue because it will have a reaction, and it certainly goes against the. It may impact on our ability to influence waste minimisation if we entirely remove ourselves from the market. So there'll be a range of options that we do need to ensure we get all those facts together to bring about a council decision, which can be done within the time frame of the long-term plan.
So are we saying that all of these splits are basically irrelevant at this point because we're going to be further decisions?
That is my view, Councillor Jennings.
Sorry, I'm missing you, Dan.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I was just thinking, so is there any obligation on us to pick up bags? I mean, is there any requirement from any legislation that we have to go around and supply that service? I mean, are we thinking somewhere down the track we can actually remove that service altogether?
I think we should bring a fulsome report, setting out the benefits of providing that service for elected members to make that decision. So we will look at an early opportunity in the new year to bring a paper to council. There's not a legislative requirement, but there's certainly some pretty extensive community benefits if we can provide a service, and if we look at who uses that service and what might happen if it wasn't available, there's some implications, and we'll try and not bring anecdotal evidence. We'll try and bring some facts around that decision making process. Across the Three Waters activity, we've had a pretty clear directive, and there's assumptions that you'll see later on when we start to unveil the rating impacts, that there needs to be an increase in trade waste revenue. We had a fairly significant increase as part of the long-term plan amendment in terms of percentage increases, and that it wasn't necessarily received favourably by our large contributors. So the team are still in the process of rolling out those increases and implementation. And as part of the long-term plan amendment, we've made a commitment to generation of another $200,000 worth of revenue. Critical to that will be a dedicated resource. So we are not looking to employ a policeman to necessarily a police person to go away and just manage that trade waste activity in isolation. We're actually looking to recruit an engineering resource dedicated into the wastewater activity that would trade waste would sit as one of their responsibilities. So we've done that as a way of ensuring that we can maximise that revenue that's gained, but we acknowledge that as we roll out a more robust process around trade waste, it won't just simply be a matter of jacking up prices to the largest contributors. It will be around a wider reach, ensuring that everyone, including the smaller businesses that do have a contribution into the wastewater network, are contributing required cost for that service.
The pre-reading with the detail of the fees and charges, some of that, I don't know if it was updated compared to the last time we saw that, but there are some of the settings or the fees in there that haven't moved that I expected to see move, and wastewater tanker loads was one of them. I had asked the question about the per cubic metre charge and comparative data to our neighbours to offload, and there's been no movement. I wonder if that's coming later though, because once that honesty system is operating automatically, which is 2 months, like when I asked is it complete, I was told 3 months and it'll be finished, and so we're now like 2 months to go. I'm just checking. As well as the water tankers, it was highlighted in the fees and schedule. Then there were lines crossed out, but then there's no new data in there. But what is there is a small amount Are these all going to be corrected and reflect as better revenue going forward?
Yeah, the wastewater, yes, and we will come back with those neighbouring charges, and yeah, certainly, be it separate unit or other upgrades when we've got long lead time items. It certainly can be a challenge when we order an item from overseas and are told 6 months, thinking that's pretty unreasonable, and then only to find that it doesn't turn up in 6 months' time. There's a lot of challenge across that space, but we'll come back with an update. That was simply around the a review of that and charging by the cubic meter rather than a truckload. So I can come back with an explanation around those slight changes.
Just while we're on it, there's only 3 more to mention in those fees and schedules. We're still charging Waitarere Surf Club bookings. I wonder if that needs to be removed, or now that they've got their new building and things will change. I don't believe that every day people can book it. I think it's just for exclusive use, or I don't know. But look, it's still in the tables and probably needs to come out. The other thing is the parking fees, which when we did our big overhaul of rates increases, that those parking fees were meant to go up, but it's not.
So that's probably a good point, Councillor Tokopura, in terms of what you're raising around like the trade waste charges and the parking meters. The fees and charges schedule has not been updated to reflect those things that are falling within package 2.5. Yeah, and that's because, remember, council haven't actually endorsed a package. We might get there by the end of today.
Monique, so does that mean, for example, I was going to ask this under the libraries, where within 2.5 the proposal might be to close community facilities on a Sunday, but I would have thought that the saving would have taken into account also the loss of revenue on those days. But are you saying that might not have been yet reflected?
It hasn't been reflected.
Yeah,
but there's very little revenue on a Sunday.
Okay.
But that was why Mark talked about, so take that, for example, community facilities where there's 500k. Obviously, within package 2.5, there's a saving. And so that will slightly narrow the gap in terms of that public-private split. But yeah, just for clarity, and apologies if we'd communicated it differently, the schedule which we'd sent out does not assume package 2.5. Those changes would be made this evening and tomorrow ahead of the council report for the Friday.
Yeah, I think we just got a bit confused because we were sent material to pre-read, which is what we've already been given, and we thought, oh, this must be the updated version, I'll read it again. And it's not, it's the same. Which, for me, who is a reader, gets annoyed when I have to do things twice, 3 times.
Yeah, water supply acknowledging that we are very close to our minimum recovery from the private split or private benefit, but there is a whole process that's been committed to alongside the long-term plan amendment to roll out water meters. There's a paper coming to council on the 13th of December alongside our wider picture on capital investment, but effectively we've acknowledged there's a need to review our entire charging system, and if we look at Foxton Beach, which is fully metered, there's a different dynamic in the way that water usage is managed over there, and that we've committed to within the 24-25 financial year to do a full review of the system, the rating and charging systems around waters, and bring that back for some direction of council, and that will in essence rebalance that public-private split.
Just to confirm, so when you receive your papers on Friday or Monday, and when we talked to you on the 13th about we're looking to model all the rating impacts based on package 2.5 being fully included and what it means for all the different rates. So at this stage, what we will be assuming the same level of water meter income in terms of it, and assuming things will stay the same and that there isn't that change in policy decision relating to water, because that decision and that work will happen during the next financial year. So just to confirm that. Okay, lastly, I'm going to go through this next bit quite quickly. I talked to it earlier, but it's around those areas where we're effectively over-compliant. And what that means is where there are areas where previously we hadn't assumed we'd have revenue, that in some cases we now do have revenue. So, for example, so what we've listed them all out here. One example would be where we hadn't assumed where we would get grant funding. Now we're getting a little bit of grant funding or a little bit of revenue from another place. So it makes sense where on a consistent basis we have actually been receiving revenue. We're proposing to adjust the split to reflect the fact that we are actually receiving some revenue in those spaces. So as an example, if we move to 6.1.4 bill accreditation and public liaison, we're proposing a 0 to 20% private benefit, and that's to reflect that we do receive building fees related to warrant of fitness, for example, and in the past that hadn't been reflected through the policy. So they're consistent patterns that over 3 or 4 years in terms of an average level of income that we will receive in all of these various spaces. We felt it was appropriate to adjust the policy so that is reflected. As a general principle, and they'll be reflected through the paper, but as a general principle, is the table comfortable with that approach? Okay, well, we'll have that reflected in the paper then that comes forward to you. So I'm not going to go through all of them there, but leave you to, if there's any specific ones you wanted to mention, but it is really to reflect what is currently happening. So now, I'll mention the first couple of slides and then I'll pass over to Monique, who's going to talk through the various options. But the first two are really to highlight where the rates increase at 21% that we discussed with you in Foxton, what that looked like, what the key drivers were. So these are really there for your information. We've been through them in a couple of workshops, but if you wanted to reference back to the various drivers of that initial 21% rates increase, that's there for you, highlighting that roughly 18% of that related to the cost of depreciation, interest, insurance, and utilities. So those were the big drivers for us in terms of that initial 21% that we talked to you about. I'll hand over to Monique now and we'll talk through some of the package options as well.
Yeah, so look, mainly for the public's benefit who will be seeing, well, they won't see this slide for the first time, but obviously as we move through it, just reminding council that we've presented a budget as Jacinta has just touched on, and what we sought direction from council on was in recognising we'd followed a zero-based budgeting process to get a little bit of a steer about, well, if we started to think about it in the context of funding envelopes, to get a sense from elected members around their appetite for risk when it came to the levers we could pull around financial, kind of those financial accounting treatments, but most importantly to get guidance from council around your appetite around level of service change. And so it was a few weeks ago that council gave us some direction that we could essentially remove the 21% and the 21% package, and we could remove the 7.5% package. And what you asked us to come back as officers with was options within that 10 to 18% envelope. And while there was general consensus around the table, just acknowledging there was, one outlier where they were keen to see a lower percentage option. And so last week in a workshop, we presented 3 options to council. We presented an 8% option, 12.8% option, and then about a 17.9% option. And we took councillors in some detail through the consequences and the implications of those packages to seek some guidance around how you'd like us to frame levels of service. Obviously, it's worth acknowledging for those that are listening publicly is that workshop was public excluded, and the reason for that is there was a number of commercial sensitivity conversations related to some of the packages or options that we presented to council. In addition to that presentation, we provided elected members a funding calculator tool where elected members were given the option of providing advice and guidance to us with a very simple yes or no vote, so that we could start seeing where there was consensus across the council table. At the end of our workshop last week, the mandate that we took from it was that our job was to go and develop a 4th option, which was a hybrid of between package 2 and package 3. And so today we are presenting package 2.5 on the basis that as we've gone through these budget conversations over the last few weeks, we're narrowing down options, and so we're coming to an option that today we need your guidance on so that we can be in a position to present with some confidence to council for endorsement next week. Package 2.5, we took a very purist approach to the way elected members had voted in the budget calculator tool. So where there were more than 5 votes, that is how we assumed what would make up package 2.5. And I'll go through how we get to package 2.5 soon. But the thing that I want to acknowledge is that you asked us to come back with an option that was around the 16.5% mark. And what you'll see there is package 2.5, based on the votes and the direction from council, gets you to a 19.3% rates increase. And so I'll take you then through soon how we could bring that down to about 16.5%, where it was fair to say that there was probably not as much consensus from elected members about those options. So package 2.5, to achieve package 2.5, and I know that you can read this on your screen, but it's important that I speak to it so that those listening can hear the conversation, would require us to reduce the rates funded depreciation, so it would be reducing our funding of depreciation, noting that it is at the lesser rate than what we presented as part of package 4. So this is the more, I suppose, the lower risk appetite. Package 2.5 requires us to cap our capital program at $40 million for both this year and next financial year, and it also requires us to limit our interest rate impact to 4.5% to essentially smooth it across other years of the long-term plan. Within this package, we acknowledge that the insurance savings that we'd hoped for are not as high as we had budgeted, despite us obviously making some decisions not to insure some assets. This package takes the additional rate income that we have received this financial year that we had not anticipated, and instead of putting that against our operational deficit for this year, we would use that to offset rates next year. Elected members have been communicated our most recent energy procurement process and how we've realised more savings across that 3-year contract than we'd anticipated, and so obviously those savings have been realised in this package.
This package assumes a 5% vacancy assumption across the business, but it also assumes some organisation improvement and overhead savings. We would be removing the adverse events emergency fund that we had hoped that we would establish through the long-term plan, and we'd also be reducing our funding into the destination management space. This package would require us to close Te Awaho Newstrom Youth Space and Te Takaretanga o Kurahopua on a Sunday. We would be doubling our parking meter fees to increase revenue by an additional 100k, and that was the point Councillor Tokopua was referencing earlier that wasn't reflected in our fees and schedules.
So effectively that's $1.10 to $2, which by that number doesn't sound like a lot when you...
Yeah, sorry, the double sounds scary, doesn't it? Increase our parking, our hourly parking meter charge by 90 cents. We'll be selling half our carbon credits. We will remove the Climate Change Activation Fund. This package to get to 19.3% means that we'd be fully rates funding the recycling service, which, as you know, we've been relying on some debt to fund that. We would be repaying our landfill debt over 20 years, not 10 years, and we would be reducing some of the funding around our digital program and our organisation training program. And then again, to the earlier point around revenue and financing policy, would increase our trade waste levies. So across those items, there was sufficient consensus that I felt that was, with confidence, I could package that up into 2.5. But very mindful that almost then is, it's actually a higher number than package 2 that we presented to you last week. And the key reason for that is because of the will of the table currently to fully rates fund recycling service. And so if we just move, I thank you, Jacinta. So in terms of, well, then if there is some uncomfortableness around the 19% number, what would council do to get to the 16.5%? And so this is where we would, there would be a commitment to some additional operational savings. In this option, we would look to remove the curbside rural recycling service. We would reduce the 100k that we had put in next year for the, I suppose, additional waste minimisation activation work, noting that it is still in year 2. And it's actually 200k in year 2 rather than 100k. In this option, we'd stop urban burn mowing and just ignore that point around energy savings. That gets you to about 18%. And so really to shift further, council need to make a call about how much you want to rates fund recycling versus debt fund. And so to give you a sense of, well, if we rates funded half of it and debt funded half, then you would be able to get down to 16.7%. And then just to show if it's wanting to get under 16.5, you would need to add back in that other option we'd presented to you in package 4, which is the further reduction of rates funded depreciation to get to 16.4%. The way in which we're proposing to frame this up for the council paper on the 13th, following your guidance and direction today, is that we would present package 2.5 as a whole, and then present those additional options in front of you on that slide as things that
because there wasn't sufficient consensus in council workshop, things that essentially would require to be debated by themselves in order for council to then determine whether your rates, where your rates are going to fall between 16.4% and 19.3%. Where you don't see options on the sheet that you may have seen within package 2, 3 or 4, that is because we did not gain sufficient direction from the table, and so therefore they've not come through the the iterative stage of budgeting.
Sorry, one just quick one in relation to that additional energy savings. Apologies, that line should have been removed, but that additional energy savings, so we're expecting 213 plus 100 of additional energy savings is included within this first slide. So that 313 that you see there is inclusive of that additional energy savings.
Monique, can we, for the report, can we have those other potential savings in there? I mean, some people may not, and may, in after reflection, want to change their mind about that.
I'm really mindful of the additional work that's going to put on officers in terms of the many conversations we will have to have with the many people and stakeholders that are impacted by those options that council haven't given clear direction on. So there were some options in there around significant impact on some of our services, and Mayor Burney knows that this morning I briefed staff on this, acknowledging that there was a public workshop this afternoon, but I'd need to do a further briefing of staff before that council report went out, and I'm happy to do that, but there are also some other partners which some of the options that we presented in front of council would require conversations, and I suppose that was the point of last week, was for council to give us that direction. I'd understood that the direction from councillors was that if elected members wanted to pick up some of those particular options or debate a particular option, they have that opportunity through standing orders.
Okay, because what worries me a little bit, and you've alluded to some of that, is the fact that, next, before we go out to consultation or even post-consultation through submissions, that someone will start bringing in some sort of recommendation that will, be as part of those other packages. And, to say that we need to do a whole lot of work then is going to be problematic, obviously.
If we don't consult on it, it's not an option because we've got to reconsult. But and maybe this might help Mayor Burney. So last week with councillors, we talked about that notion that package 2.5, however it lands today, and the officers' report will be kind of packaged as the preferred option. But in the report, we would comment at a high level on some of the level of service changes or decrease in investment that was considered, because status quo, which is kind of like a 25% rates increase, package 2.5, wherever that lands, with a slight change in level of service. But then also, I think the feedback I got from councillors last week is they still want to be able to say to the community, we considered what a 12% rates increase looked like, and the impact meant we were going to have to consider closure of reducing this. I'm just really mindful of it, the level in which that's pitched in the council report.
It is available for the budget calculator that every elected member has within the portal, though. All those options that were considered are all laid out and costed within there.
I just thought I got different feedback last week.
Look, I do it purely because I think elected members don't actually realise that they've actually almost now decided what the rates increase is going to be, and that I think there may be some different opinions as to that. And I just want to, I suppose, warn councillors that, you know, they've had their chance almost.
Absolutely. They should have showed up.
Yep.
Mayor Burney, and look, I think the approach proposed by Monique is 100% spot on, and all I was going to do is ask a question to her and the team to see if was there any feedback received from elected members post the workshop last week or in advance of this workshop today that the elected members around the table should be aware of? Is there any feedback, any objection, any concerns raised about any of the stuff that was sent as post-reading and pre-reading?
No. We have asked for any feedback by the end of today as well, and with regards to the presentation we sent out earlier.
I mean, I think you can only proceed on the basis of the information that you have at the moment, and this is the direction that's been given, and yeah, that's where we find ourselves.
So, is it? So it's 19.3. It's 16.7, or it's 16.4. That's the question today. Or is that what this is? This is what will be in the 13th of December vote.
That's how we're proposing to present it in the council report for the 13th, and I suppose that's what we're asking feedback on, based on the really purist approach and the direction we took last week. I suppose an alternative option, which I think is what Mayor Burney is suggesting, is that we also present package 2, 3 and 4.
No, I'm not.
No?
No.
Just the idea, some of the...
Maybe some lines like in package 2.5 that would actually bring those down as to whether they may be examples of further cuts. That's all. I'm not suggesting further envelopes or anything like that. Just lines on the to debate. Even if there's only 4 or 5 people that said possibly, maybe that's an option. All I'm asking is the question as to whether that's feasible.
Do you want to speak to that?
Look, I don't know about putting them as lines in the sheet as things to... Well, they can be debated. That's the will of the table. But that's not package 2.5. That's not the direction and guidance we took from council last week. And if I had got that direction, my week would have looked really different this week, where I would have been having very different conversations with staff and partners about the impact of that. And so what I wonder as a compromise, Mayor Burney, is if in that report it speaks to some of the additional options. What that means is that still gives an elected member the will, using standing orders, to put something on the table to suggest an addition to what's been presented within package 2.5. So it's not stopping an elected member from wanting to, for example, debate the removal of investment in the Housing Action Plan, which is an example of there wasn't enough feedback from that last week, so it's not been brought forward into this package.
Okay, well, that's all I'm asking. Yeah. And look, I agree with Sam completely. You know, that we've got the package and we have had plenty of time to feedback on it. We've given our thoughts, and this is where we've landed. So happy to proceed with that. What I'm just, I suppose, just mindful of is that some people might not accept what's in front of them and want to put other things on the table. That's all.
Then all you need to do is grant people like us who are here today extra speaking time, and we'll deal with that.
So, I guess my feedback around, like, well, of course, I'm going to say 19.3 is high to me. But that's where, look, you can see the votes. That's where the 9s and the 8s out of 13, kind of that's where it sits. So that's, I'm just one vote here. But then to get that further down to 16.7, I'm now, because I was hard on the, because remind me when this report comes, how much have we already loan funded recycling to date? And it's another 1.5 if we don't do this. But now, looking at where this has landed, I would move potentially. I'd move to the half rates fund, half debt fund recycling. Whereas before, when I didn't have these tallies, I was like, nah, I thought So if I know that on the 13th, these are the options: 9.3, 16.7, 16.4. However, these were the other considerations that didn't get the 5 or more votes. You could potentially debate or stand in order to do that. I'm accepting that this is where it's at for now until the 13th.
Okay, you guys right? I'm going to disagree with Mayor Bernie and Sam a little bit. I mean, so can you just explain to me? So we're going to vote on those top 4 columns basically individually next week. Is that what you're saying?
You would, yes.
Some of those were considered as part of larger packages in the spreadsheet that we saw last week. So basically, staff have just picked those individual elements out to then bring to the table to vote on next week. Whereas I kind of agree with Mayor Bernie with his first question is there should be other stuff taken out of some of those larger packages on that spreadsheet that we then should vote on as well.
They are the options.
Not everyone voted for one package or another. So it was
I'll pick on the rural recycling one. That was part of a package within that recycling line, and that no one basically supported at the end. Yet somewhere along the process from last week to this week, it's been pulled out as a separate item that we now consider separately.
And that is because the direction we got last week was to present a package back that was 16.5%. And when we took all of your votes, you'd increase the rates, you didn't decrease them. And so then what we took was everything that sat 4 and above.
That rural recycling one was part of 3 or 2 other categories in there as well. Reduced recycling service, reduced waste minimisation.
Yeah, and reduced waste minimisation is in there. And the reduced removal of recycling service altogether did not get enough votes. Are you concerned about our methodology, Councillor Proctor?
I am, between last week and this week, how we've gone from sort of an aggregated list down to a few specific items that we're then going to vote on as well.
Direction and guidance we took from councillors last week.
Is there a specific item within the options that you would like us to swap into this that isn't currently in there? Because we're happy to do that. Because there are some that had 3 lines in there, like 3 items within a line. So there is a little bit of nuance in there from that perspective. So
that was essentially my question. There are some items in there which were aggregated, had 3 or 4 lines of things we could choose for, things in there. And we selected one, that is a package rather than individual items.
So for that one, would you prefer we've got 2 of the 3, you would like the urban one in there as well?
My question is more about the process from last week to this week, and then staff presenting us options that we have to then vote on. So maybe I'm getting confused in the process.
Well, the process is we presented 3 packages. Councillors had a complete allergic reaction to package 4, and they had hives to package 3. They said package 2, yep, although they were quite concerned about the mechanism around debt funding versus rates funding recycling. They asked us to come back with package 2.5 at a 16.5%. We took all of the votes and all of the feedback that we'd got. Anything that was 6 and above came into package 2.5, which is your 19 and something %. But of course that doesn't equal 16.5%, which is what you wanted. And so what we've attempted to do is put in front of you, well, how would you get to that 16.5% by using those elements where there was the not the largest amount of support because there was no majority, but enough support. But am I hearing from you as your concern that we've cherry-picked things?
.7% if we remove the funding for emergency management, the contingency plan, remove funding for destination management, remove community development, reduce grant funding for Horowhenua Company. So why aren't we then separating those 4 out as individual items that we vote on next week?
So the reason for that is because as we went through the packages, so each package took package, so hypothetically, let's say package 3 took package 2 and then added some things. And so when councillors voted on the added things, there wasn't the same support. So therefore we only took from package 1 or package 2.
We can easily add to this today. There's nothing, if we've got it not quite right in terms of picking it, there's been no intentional cherries being picked. So if there is a preference to choose a different mix that you think has got equivalent votes, we can do that.
But what I would respectfully request is that this is a public conversation and some of those options we presented to you have impacts on obligations this organisation has to individuals or groups of people. And so just if there is some additional options you'd like added in, can we make sure we just don't necessarily read what is on that piece of paper, but frame it in a way where it's about the investment in that service? It might be Mayor Burney, there needs to be a public excluded part of the report. But I kind of need some direction because this is, like, I'm getting different direction from what I got last week, and I don't want to be in a position where next week this is at the feet of officers when actually they have done everything to try and navigate and support elected members through what I acknowledge is really challenging decision making. But if we need a different process, now is the time to tell me.
Can I just say that that briefing that we had where we went through this line by line and officers explained in some detail what each part meant, and everyone around there was, I mean, my take was everyone was comprehending. We had, you know, the support was there. We had an extra chance. We had till 10 o'clock the following Friday. And look, I'm not even, like, there's things that I'd like to pick apart as well. Like, if I think I shared at the time, I'd close, I mean, this is not easy stuff, but closing Te Tākere versus TANS, I thought TANS is different in nature because it's tourism, it has a museum, there's other elements to it, and I'd be more inclined to leave that open on a Sunday, but I accept they're all closing on a Sunday in this package. So, and then there's some of what Jonathan's pointed out that actually, I would have some of that as well. But we're doing the best with a bad situation, like, and I think this is not just because these numbers have landed where they are. That doesn't stop you from challenging it or debating for a particular thing, like your rural recycling or whatever you want to.
Is it an option that, because if that's not well understood of the process, and to kind of Mia Bernie's point, but more your point, Jonathan, that people might be anticipating something different, that if we circulated something to elected members that was really clear about this is how we're intending to do it, and that if there were parts of either package 1, 2, 3, 4 that they were expecting to debate next Wednesday, to signal that, for example, by tomorrow, end of play tomorrow, and then we can package that up in the council report. It just might mean that some of it needs to be in a public report versus some of it needs to be in a public excluded report.
Yeah, I think I'm getting lost in the fact that following the spreadsheet seemed to go one direction. Okay, you've got direction from the council that you needed to make further savings, and then all of a sudden today we see a separate list of items up there that we have to decide for next week at a formal council meeting, without much justification on why they've been selected that way. And I'll be honest, I'm surprised to see remove rural recycling up there. I didn't see debate or didn't see it on the spreadsheet as something separate that was going to be considered. And yet, within a space of a few days, it's been popping up there now.
Yeah, so Councillor Proctor, this is, like, with respect, this is probably where not having the context of last week's workshop is unhelpful, because actually the removal of rural recycling was in package 3 on its own. It just happened to be in addition to package 2 and 1. So I can see how the spreadsheet gives an inference that they are packaged up, and that's just maybe just how we've designed the spreadsheet. But like we're happy to take guidance either way. What I need is confidence that whatever the outcome, whether things are in or out, that councillors feel like the decision-making process has been one that reflects their expectations.
Well, I mean, I'm astounded that we have a spreadsheet here which is quite clear. There's the votes for these packages, and yet that's sort of today we're presenting something which is against those votes and against those packages.
It's not. It's not.
Well, maybe I'm reading the spreadsheet wrong here, but it says 3 people voted for package 3, was it?
So we all took bits out of different packages. So we didn't decide on a particular package. We were able to say yes or no right across from envelope 1 to envelope 5 as to whether we agreed or not, or 2, 3 and 4 were the 3 that we took out. So some of us supported stuff and didn't want to see it removed from, say, package 2, but thought we could actually pull something else out of package 3. And that's where those votes that you can see on the slide there, why they're part of 2.5.
Was effectively going through each line, looking at where the highest vote was for each of those individual options and where it was higher than 6 or so. 6 is putting them in this first option. That came to a higher increase than we expected everyone would want to go forward with. And so then in terms of, there's a little bit of judgment in terms of which ones from the conversations around that table we heard were likely to want to go into the mix to get to an increase that was in the 16.5s. That this last bit isn't as scientific as the first slide, which did go specifically line by line looking for the highest vote and automatically putting it into the mix. And that was because the increase we anticipated it was going to be too high for everybody. So that was the key reason why There is a
Yeah, and that was because the instruction was to come, or the direction was to get to a 16.5% package, 2.5. So taken like a solid understanding on that first page, and then this is the stuff that council officers have said, if you want a 16.5% package, this appears to have the most support in terms of these line items based on last week. So staff have just executed the direction from last week, as I understand it.
This is the step that's missing today for me, is seeing this process on top of what's being presented on the spreadsheet. I mean, yeah, okay, I was away last week and I was working off the spreadsheet and didn't see this extra step anywhere. So,
what would be helpful for you, or what do you need from officers in order to inform your decision making next week?
no, I'll just wait till next week. So,
Monique, I've opened up the budget calculator to have a look, but did we get responses from all 13 elected members, or are we talking about 9? Because I guess my fundamental concern about the mythology of taking a number like 6 is 6 is still the minority and not the majority of elected members. So obviously that's a bit of an obstacle. And I guess some of the moving pieces around what you may take out or what you may include could potentially weigh on what that majority decision looks like. I think what's presented here at 2.5, as a whole with the other add-ons, is certainly the direction that the elected members we landed on last week in terms of, we like 2 and we want to land somewhere around 16.5, and you've picked a pathway towards getting us there. So I don't think what's presented here is misaligned with where we wanted to end up. I think there is debate necessarily on the stepping stones to get to 16.5. I mean, from my perspective, I look at a scenario like they're removing the 100k of climate change, being, well, if we're at a 6 vote for, and we haven't got the full responses from the council table, given the relatively marginal impact on rates, I'd probably still land on the side of removing that because of the marginal impact on rates. And I guess that's the individual aspect of the call, right? I'm not necessarily sure what would be helpful. Sam?
But I guess I agree with you, Clint. Yeah?
There you go. Oh, wait.
I agree with you, Clint. But it's from my perspective, it's for elected members now to navigate, if they want to add things into the decision mix, that's for them to progress now. Like we've basically given direction up until today about what to put inside a council report. The onus now shifts to elected members to try and lobby and get the numbers in order to put something else in. And if they want to do that, then obviously they have to come prepared and understand that, be ready to be able to articulate what the implications of whatever they're proposing or wanting to put forward is. I just it just seems really like we're in limbo because we don't have enough direction, because we haven't got that from the full contingent of elected members. And so now we're having to put onto the table potentially a whole lot of options just to keep people happy because they might want options in there. Like I think the fair and reasonable approach at this point is that there's nothing stopping elected members from trying to add something into the mix next week.
Yeah.
But they have to do that through and navigate that through the standing orders and come ready to articulate their position. But I just think we're going to end up relitigating a whole bunch of issues. And I accept that where there's only 5 votes for something, that there's a risk that it could still fail if the full contingent of 13 are at the table and 8 vote against that. But I just think we've got to operate on the basis of the best information we have at the moment, which is the information that the staff have in the spreadsheet and the direction that's been given to them in terms of developing an option to put inside a paper. That's where I sit.
So for absolute clarity and transparency for any of our public that ever go back to this, I'm going to be very frank and say we have spent hours week after week building up to last week, and last week less than 9 actually turned up out of 13 to do what I believe is a critical part where the rubber hits the road. And those who were absent were given an opportunity to feed into that, despite they didn't have all the context from that briefing. And so 9 out of 13 filled in that spreadsheet, and we have the results so that our officers can go away and come up with, taking that information, building reports in order to hit certain timeframes and deadlines of the 13th of December. Today is our last opportunity before the 13th, and there are 5 of us here, well, 5 physically in the room and 1 online out of 13. This is not the officers, they're trying to now having to, based on this last 10-20 minute conversation, okay, shall we adjust? 5 or 6 was the majority at the time out of 9. This is what we're looking at, and if people don't like it and people that are absent, again, that is their opportunity to debate any item that they want to pull out or put back in. But this is it, show up, do the work, and bring your argument at the right time and see what influence you can make.
I partially disagree with you, Buddy. We need to be careful that the workshops are not used as decision-making processes, and then it's a fate of complete at council meetings as well. There has to be still that freedom to move things around and make decisions in those formal council meetings as well. It seems, and in response to Sam, it seems easier to move things into the list to be voted on rather than taking things out of that list to be voted on currently, because it seems like a decision's already been made in a workshop that this is the process that we're going and this is the list of 4 that we have to vote. So I'm a little bit worried about that process and, transparency through there. We've had spreadsheets, but yet the spreadsheet has an extra step on it that we get today.
I think the best way forward on this is probably for Mayor Bernie and I to have a conversation about the approach we'll take for next Wednesday. This feels pretty frustrating for staff because we've put a lot of time on the process, and based on the direction we had at the workshop, this is too important to not get it right. I think Bernie, you and I can have a conversation about how I'm not prepared for it to be assumed or there to be any thought process that officers have dictated or driven what's come through in this budget. And so I'm keen to make sure that those other options that we presented in 3 and 4 that did not get support, I just need to have a think about how that might be packaged in a council report. And it may be, Mayor Bernie, that some decision making will have to happen public excluded, given the sensitivity on some of those things that were pitched. The worst case scenario from my perspective would be we have a council meeting next Wednesday and we don't have enough elected members prepared to make a decision because as officers we need endorsement of our budget, whatever it is, in order for us to prepare for audit come the 5th of February.
I just want to add that I'll be completely honest and say that I'm horrified that rural recycling is going to be removed. And it seems like there's been a process where those urban councillors here have made a decision, and that's a fait accompli going forward that then we have to vote on and live with.
Jonathan, that's not the case, and I'd be horrified if you thought that we collaborated together to do that. If that has been workshopped, we've seen maps of where urban and rural recycling was done. There is no consistency. It is completely haphazard and ad hoc. So if we wanted to do it properly, we'd be adding considerable cost to the recycling budget if we did it properly, because half the rural areas don't get it now. And so what we're doing here is making it actually consistent and that no one gets it, rather than half do and half don't. So that has been canvassed. It has been given some direction by councillors across who were at that workshop. And workshops are not decision-making forums. They are direction-seeking forums, and we have had plenty of opportunity to feed into that direction. And that is what this package is. It's around us setting a direction where we were comfortable with coming between a package of two, which was the 18%, and the 3, which was 12%. I might have got those around the wrong way. Most settled and thought that the 16.5 to 17 was a comfortable space where we would land. And these are the things that we are now going to debate next week as to whether that continues.
I mean, I think you have to be careful with your words there. You just said workshops are not decision-making forums, yet you made a decision to exclude urban recycling in there, and that's what we're going forward with. Can I finish? I am hearing you. You said you made a decision at a workshop that that's what's going to be excluded. But anyway, if in my simple mind, I think that there's a problem with transparency and process, it's easily going to be picked up on by public as well. If there is a perception that all of a sudden a bunch of urban councillors that turn up is going to then remove all the services for the rural community, yet raise their rates and expect them to pay more.
Oh, Jonathan, that's just bullshit. Come on. Seriously. This is just, yeah. Man, this is just...
Well, that's the perception. And this is my concern about how we go through this process and the next process, and what gets voted on and what doesn't get voted on in the council meetings.
This has been a extremely open and transparent process. That's why all our workshops are publicly live streamed. Public are welcome to attend. We hide nothing. And there's absolutely any suggestion that urban councillors have got together to decide or make a collaborative decision is absolute nonsense, and I'll refute that completely.
There's clearly a perspective that this process, it's obviously been interpreted in a way which is absolutely not what it is, Councillor Proctor. So it's a shame that that has been inferred. However, what's more important to me is that what happens between now and next Wednesday, in terms of the advice and the information we provide to elected members, ensures that the decision-making process is one which reflects the standard of excellence that that I think that we have sought to achieve through this project. So, look, me, Bernie, and I will have a conversation, and I just need to think about how these packages are reflected in a council report, and how that decision-making process happens, given it feels like we're going back a couple of weeks now. I can't stress enough the importance of an endorsement next Wednesday. Otherwise, we're gonna be at significant risk of delaying our long-term plan program, and that's not really an option. So it may mean that we anticipate a longer council meeting next Wednesday.
My question, I guess, Jonathan's raised the urban burn mowing, but recycling, yeah. I can imagine one or two other councillors might like to look at urban burn mowing as well. But sitting around the table right now, apart from what Jonathan has raised, are we having an allergic reaction to what's being presented to us, or a specific item that we can have a discussion about today?
Well, obviously, I'm allergic to rural recycling being removed.
Beyond that, is there any other lines that you would? It seems to me potentially, we're not too far away from landing where we need to in terms of the direction, but there feels to me like there does need to be another conversation amongst elected members around, okay, what would they take out or what would they put in, but at a very specific level, so that Monique, you and your officers have that clear direction. Because if I'm hearing that, we're held up on $150,000 that had to 1.2% on rates, it may be that that's a portion that doesn't get support and doesn't progress as per the table, but I kind of feel like...
Well, just clarify for that one as well, if it's okay. So in relation to the rural recycling, because we have the 80-20 mix at the moment, if you pay a rural rate currently and you receive recycling, it does mean you're getting recycling, but you're not paying for it. And because of the way that the mix is set. So as part of the modelling, whichever way we go, just to flag, we will be coming back as part of the final bit and doing some modelling in terms of, if it was to go ahead, what does that new map look like, and then what does that new mix of rates look like? Because we now have a separate rate for recycling, you've asked us to have a separate rate for recycling. That will look quite different as well. So just to flag that sort of mix in there as well around recycling.
So you can keep rural recycling. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, but
so there's been no decision made about reducing curbside rural recycling. There has been significant information provided to elected members about the challenges, the risks, the financial modelling. Councillors have said through a couple of workshops, let's have a look at it. Clear direction from council during those workshops. Don't really like the idea of reducing the service. However, where it makes sense, because it's no longer practical, then we should probably look at that. But in addition to that, council have asked us to frame up these envelopes, and so within one of the envelopes was this option. An option out of today, depending on the guidance you give us, is that we remove that 1.2% as an option and so it doesn't go into the council paper, or an option is we add back in the other option, some of the other options that got 2 votes or 3 votes, acknowledging that there are a few things in there that got 0 support and interest.
So Monique, how I understood the options would be presented in the paper, based on the direction last week, is that the report will have option A, preferred rating option to consult with, is 2.5, which is in front of us. Option B, something else. And it's, if someone wants to move something else, then they take this as a starting point and they say, I want to remove line X or add in line X. that's the process that I was anticipating based on the direction last week, that's how the paper would work. So it is entirely open to, say, Jonathan to come along, look at the council paper next week and go, yeah, I'm not happy with package 2.5 as it's currently presented, option A. So I'm going to move option B, which is package 2.5 without removing rural recycling, but adding in, taking away something else. Like, is my understanding of the process and how the paper is going to frame the options, is that correct?
So package 2.5 is your 19 point something. Go back to that previous slide. And then in addition to that, the next page are the options, additional options being presented for council to vote for or against, remembering they'll still have to vote for or against the previous package, to then try get to the 16.5%. So at which point any councillor could be the first mover and try and set the direction. I think Councillor Proctor's point is, why is some other stuff not on there that was on the sheet? And the answer to that is because the direction we got was to use the majority vote and then come up with the next most supported group of things to come up with a hybrid of 16.5%. But I do not want there to be any inference that officers have cherry-picked stuff out or are trying to manipulate the outcome of this based on what we put in the council report. And so, like, if there's one elected member that is giving the indication of that, I'm not prepared to take the risk that other elected members think that also. So I think what we're going to need to do is add some stuff in, but only when that stuff got any support, because there was some things in here that got zero support. All I'm highlighting is that feels really frustrating because it's not the direction we got last week, and it does mean that there's some options in there which we're going to need to go have some contractual conversations about, or frame a public excluded council paper. But I come back to the point, it's more important we do it right than and get it right next week than elected members feeling disillusioned with the process.
I agree. I think you have to get it right. For me, it seems like there's an arbitrary cut off that has been made by staff of what's in these extra things and what isn't.
Yeah, there was no cherry picking, and there are losers across the board, and you know, I hear your frustration around the rural recycling, but I mean, look, urban burn mowing in there is a $90,000 more cut. Like, I don't understand how you can think that it's a group of us against. Yeah, it's just not there.
Perception is dangerous at times.
Yours.
Me, Bernie, I don't think we're going to get anywhere further on this. I think that it's really, we're better to put our energy into the council report now.
Well, the only one that seems contrary to the view of that package 2.5 appears to be Jonathan. Even if the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us, or 4 of us, 5 of us, including Sam, gave you an indication that 2.5 plus those extra lines is about where they are comfortable with that.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to take out rural recycling and then I'll be all happy next week.
Well, that's where the debate will happen on that particular issue, like any other line in that space. I'd be really annoyed if other 4 councillors that did not fill in this Excel spreadsheet and had the opportunity to give feedback then decided that they were going to, if you like, introduce new items that weren't included, or even to the extent of saying I don't support that or I do support that, because they haven't bothered to actually input into the information. We trying to give officers a feel for where we sat. Those of us that were here did so, and I'm comfortable where we sit. I'm comfortable that we can go to a council meeting next week and endorse a package, whether that includes all of 2.5 or whether it includes some of those lines, and that's to be debated and discussed. And I'm not making any predetermination around where we sit with that, but I'm comfortable with the overall look of what is being presented.
Let's be careful that we're not using spreadsheets and workshops to make decisions that are fait complete on the council.
Nina, have you got anything you'd like to add, or where you sit?
I understand looking at the spreadsheet and why those were picked. Well, I don't understand why they were picked out. I understand we wanted to get to an end point, but I mean, I could see where you're coming from. That's why I was like waiting for more discussion around it. But it sounds like everyone's a little bit over it right now. So in order to leave it, I'm happy with where I landed, Bernie. That's all I can say. If other members, especially members that haven't completed it, I don't know why they didn't complete it, and I don't want to surmise why they didn't complete it. But then they're going to have their say next week. So, again, we could be having this discussion again next week over lots of things, given that not everyone participated in filling in our budget spreadsheet. I found it difficult, but I still gave it a go. And that was going back. So, yeah, I can't say why the others didn't. But yeah, I mean, I looked at it and thought, well, actually, there was two things in that box. How come both of them? I don't know. But I guess we're going to have that conversation next week when the others that didn't fill it in have something to say also.
Are you in a position, though? Are you in a position, you think, though, to be able to discuss what's in front of us here, that 2.5 and the extra lines?
Based on what I have in front of me.
Cool.
Oh, sorry. Based on what I have in front of me, I'm confident that I could make a decision. Again, though, others are going to have a say, which could then sway. So, while I'm confident right now, I can't say how I'm going to feel next Wednesday when others weigh in on an argument which could sway me.
That's what debate's for.
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to proceed because this is not about saying exactly what you agree with in terms of the number. It's about what package you want to take forward as a preferred option and what do we want to see appear in a report to potentially debate. So the debate and decision making happens next week. This is just about setting the framework for what's actually on the table. So I'm really comfortable with where things are at.
Clint?
Yep. Sorry. Yeah, look, I'm comfortable with option 2.5 plus add-ons. I just hope that the table, when they turn up next week, realises that 19.3 isn't palatable to the community. So, there has to be.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, this is where it's at, just in this moment of time, and it's just one option. Once we go through the next part of the process, there will be further options that actually go out to consultation. While there might be a preferred option, doesn't mean it stays there, and this can change iterations again, and then you hear from community, and then we change again. Like, this is not the end, and it's going to be okay, even though it's an increase.
Yeah, I'm not okay, as I've made quite clear. I mean, obviously, we're going to have a preferred option of 19.3, and then that's obviously not going to be selected, as Sam has said. And then we'll have to come back with another motion of a whole lot of things which are in or out. Yet the options of what's in or out is very constrained. Not everything that we've discussed is going to be in or out. So, yeah.
Me, Bernie, conversation tonight, I have no level of confidence that staff are in a position to present a report where elected members' reaction to that report wrongly will reflect on staff. And so what I think is the best way forward is if package 2.5 is presented at 19.3%, and then there is a list of options in addition to that which reflects any option that got one vote. But what that will mean is there will need to be public excluded parts of next week. It's not fair on staff for process to be changed midway and then people to not be happy with that process. But it's too important to not get this right, because this is like step 8 of 88 of an adoption of the long-term plan. And so if next week doesn't go well from a process perspective, that will reflect poorly on the adoption of the long-term plan process. So I think it's better we clarify this stuff today in order to pave the way for a smoother long-term plan process.
You want a decision now as to whether we should go public excluded for some of this now, or is that a conversation that you and I will have?
Well, it will be my responsibility to sign off on the agenda, and that will have advice in it. But there are some elements in this package where it will need to be a public excluded conversation. Based on the commercial sensitivity of some of those options. But where there are options that got a 0 vote, it is not going in a council report. That's Councillor Proctor, would you agree with that?
Even if they only had one, I'd take it those as well. Oh.
Yeah. There's a couple that only got 2. Should we keep going through the present? Have we finished talking about budgets and envelopes and process?
So, Monique, I mean, so from my perspective, this is where it gets all really complicated, because like I begrudgingly voted in favour of the $40 million capital program without knowing what the actual impact on, like, so what's in, what's out, you know? And so because I knew that we needed to have a starting point, we needed to have a line in the sand, but now it feels like everything's back on the table.
Well, how else do you propose we do it, Councillor Jennings, when we have, because it's not just Councillor Proctor that's raised concerns tonight. Councillor Grimstone has signalled his concern about, people still having the opportunity to participate, and so has Councillor Hori Tapa, and actually Mayor Burney raised concerns initially. So, like, that gives me no confidence that we can keep following the process that we'd set out, and that we need to divert. That was a question.
I mean, does it? Can you go back to package 2.5? No, look, don't worry about it. I mean, yeah. If you've got a proposed approach, I guess we just have to go with it.
Well, what I've heard is that there's not a concern, no. I don't think, Councillor Proctor, about what makes up the 19.3. You're not raising any concerns about that process. But what you're raising concerns about is what's fallen in the mix between the 19.3 and the 16.4, and the inference that officers have cherry picked stuff, which is not true, but I'm not prepared to wear that in the absence of mitigating that by putting the other things back in that there was not enough support for, but were still options in the package.
Okay.
This is called the life of a chief executive walking the tightrope. Right, Caro, take us through to next week.
Thank you. Just to come to next week as well, you will also be asked through the milestone report to endorse the proposed SSPs, to endorse the significant forecasting assumptions, endorse the fees and charges, and the revenue and financing policy splits that have been discussed today. So we will be updating all of our documents to reflect the discussions today for you to consider and yes, Jacinta?
Just to flag though that we won't be publishing rates modelling and that type of thing because there isn't enough steer at this stage to do that, so we will hold off doing that until the new year. So the borrowings graphs and the rates will be indicative, and then the modelling in terms of all the different options and what it might mean for individual properties, we will hold off into the new year. Yeah.
And then as we're continuing that the guidance that we are seeking is to assist us with the preparation of the consultation material and supporting documents. As we head into the Christmas break, we would like to, and we will present to you for your review and consideration over the break, the waste assessment, the draft WMMP, the draft development contributions policy. This is the wording rather than the finances because the money we're still working on, and we'll present that to you later in January. The full fees and charges draft, the draft significance and engagement policy, and the working with Māori policy. We'll ask for your feedback by the 15th of January to guide and inform our workshop on the 24th of January. That workshop will present to you a draft consultation document and a fully developed LTP. I think I've got a little glitch in there. I meant to put the development contributions policy. So could I just check that I am, yes. And then on the 31st of January, we will take your feedback from that 24th and make any further refinements to the consultation document and bring back all the supporting documents, which is basically the components of the LTP. And that take any further changes, and then we need to send it to audit for them to start work on it on the 5th of February. And so it's all funneling through to that point.
Any questions or concerns? And then probably just the other thing is noting that the report for the 13th won't be with elected members. We'd said Friday, Monday at the latest. It's probably more than likely Monday now. So it will be a late item on Monday, but acknowledging that none of it will be new information. It's a summary and kind of reflection of the workshops over the previous weeks. Thanks, Caro. What a way to celebrate your birthday. Go home. Yeah. Thank you, councillors.